The dust of Sweetwater Creek ran red that summer day in 1873, not from drought, but from blood. June Talbot's blood. They beat her in broad daylight while good people looked away, their cowardice dressed up as caution. 3 men, 1 woman, no mercy. Until the click of a revolver changed everything. Until a stranger with storm-cloud eyes dismounted and spoke words that would reshape 2 broken lives. You'll stand with me. This is their story. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this tale travels. The Texas sun hung in the sky like a copper coin pressed against blue cloth, radiating heat that made the very air shimmer and dance above the rutted main street of Sweetwater Creek. It was the kind of heat that turned men mean and women weary, the kind that baked the earth until it cracked like old leather and made even the shade feel like a blessing barely deserved. June Talbot had learned to endure that heat. She'd learned to endure many things in her 23 years: poverty, loss, the wandering hands of men who thought a woman alone was a woman available. But what she faced on that August afternoon would test the very limits of human endurance. She stood outside Harker's General Store, her threadbare dress clinging to her thin frame, a small bundle of purchased goods clutched in her arms: flour, sugar, a bit of salted pork, the meager supplies that would see her through another week of scraping by in the widow's shack at the edge of town. The coins she'd used to pay for those goods had been earned honestly, painfully, through taking in washing and mending from the few families charitable enough to offer work to a woman with no family, no protection, no standing in the rigid social order of frontier Texas. She'd just stepped off the wooden boardwalk when she heard his voice. "There she is, the thieving bitch!" June's blood turned to ice water despite the heat. She knew that voice. Blake Harker, son of the store's owner, a young man whose sense of entitlement exceeded his intelligence by a considerable margin. She turned slowly, carefully, her hands tightening on her bundle. Blake stood in the doorway of his father's store, his face flushed with more than just heat, his eyes bright with malicious purpose. Behind him stood 2 of his constant companions, Virgil Kane, a ranch hand with a reputation for cruelty, and Pete Sutter, whose weak chin and weaker character made him the perfect follower for any man mean enough to lead. "I don't know what you're talking about," June said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear beginning to coil in her stomach like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. "I paid for everything in this bundle. Your father took my money not 5 minutes ago." "Liar!" Blake descended the steps with theatrical fury, his boots hammering against the wood. "You took money from the register. I saw you. My father's old and his eyes are failing, but mine work just fine." It was a lie. June knew it. Blake knew it. And she suspected, with a sinking certainty, that this had nothing to do with theft and everything to do with the night 2 weeks prior when Blake had cornered her behind the saloon, his whiskey-soaked breath hot against her face as he tried to kiss her, to paw at her dress, to take what she had no intention of giving. She'd slapped him then, hard enough to leave a mark, hard enough to wound his pride in front of the 2 friends who'd been watching. This was revenge, simple, cruel, and wrapped in the respectable clothing of civic duty. "I took nothing," June said, lifting her chin even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You're angry because I won't—" "Shut your lying mouth!" Blake closed the distance between them in 3 quick strides, and before June could react, he'd grabbed the bundle from her arms and hurled it into the street. Flour exploded in a white cloud. The precious pork landed in a puddle of standing water. Sugar scattered across the dust like dirty snow. June stared at her ruined supplies. A week's food, a week's hard-earned money, gone in an instant. Something inside her snapped. "You bastard!" she breathed, and then louder. "You cowardly, lying bastard!" Blake's hand cracked across her face with enough force to snap her head sideways. The blow sent her stumbling, and she might have fallen if she hadn't caught herself against a hitching post. Her cheek blazed with pain. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. "I'll teach you respect," Blake snarled, advancing on her. "I'll teach you what happens to women who think they're too good for a Harker." June tried to run. She made it perhaps 3 steps before Virgil Kane caught her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to bruise. He yanked her backward, and she collided with Pete Sutter, who shoved her forward again, directly into Blake's fist, This blow caught her in the stomach, driving the air from her lungs in a painful whoosh. June doubled over, gasping, her vision sparking with black dots. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard laughter. Male laughter, cruel and delighted. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" Blake's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Not so quick with that sharp tongue?" A boot caught her in the ribs, she couldn't tell whose, and June went down hard, her palms scraping against the rough dirt of the street. She tried to curl into herself, to protect her vital organs the way a wounded animal might, but there were too many of them, and they were too strong. Another kick, this one to her back. Pain exploded along her spine. June cried out, the sound torn from her throat before she could stop it, and that cry seemed to excite them further. "Should have been nicer to Blake," Virgil said, his voice thick with satisfaction as his boot connected with her shoulder. "Should have shown some gratitude when a good man like him took an interest." June's face was pressed against the dirt now, red dust filling her nose and mouth. She could taste it, could feel it grinding between her teeth. Above her, the three men circled like wolves around a downed deer, taking turns delivering blows that felt like they were breaking her apart from the inside. Through the haze of pain, June became aware of something almost worse than the beating itself. Silence. The awful, condemning silence of the other people on the street. She could see them, could see their boots and the hems of their skirts as they stood on the boardwalks, watching. Mrs. Henderson from the dress shop. Tom Miller, who ran the stable. Even Deputy Rollins, whose job it was to protect people like her. No one moved, no one spoke, no one helped. This was the way of things in Sweetwater Creek. Blake Harker was the son of one of the town's most prosperous merchants. Virgil and Pete worked for the McGraw Ranch, which owned half the land in the county. They had standing, connections, power. June Talbot was nobody. A widow woman with no family, no money, no friends willing to risk themselves on her behalf. In the harsh arithmetic of frontier justice, she counted for nothing at all. "That's enough now, boys." This was a new voice, Sheriff Dugan, his tone weary rather than authoritative. "You've made your point. Let her be." "She's a thief," Blake panted, his face flushed with exertion. "She needs to learn." "She's learned," the sheriff said. "Any more and you'll have to answer for it. Even a woman like that don't deserve to be beat to death in the street." A woman like that. The words cut deeper than any boot or fist. June squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to disappear, to die, to simply cease existing in this moment of absolute humiliation and pain. Blake spat in the dirt inches from her face. "All right then. Reckon she knows her place now." Their footsteps retreated. The crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment concluded, eager to return to the mundane business of their mundane lives. Within moments, the street was nearly empty again, as if nothing had happened at all. June lay in the dirt, each breath a knife in her ribs, and tried to move. Her right arm responded sluggishly. Her left didn't respond at all. Something was broken inside her. She could feel it, could feel the wrongness in her body like a discordant note in a familiar song. She managed to roll onto her side, a movement that sent fresh waves of agony cascading through her torso. Her vision swam. Her dress was torn, she realized dimly. Torn and soaked with blood. Her blood, and dust and God knew what else. She must look like something dragged behind a horse. "Get up," she told herself fiercely. "Get up before they come back. Get up and run and hide and maybe you'll survive this." But her body wouldn't obey. She was broken. They'd broken her. And as she lay there in the red Texas dust under the merciless August sun, June Talbot felt something inside her begin to crack, something deeper than bone, more essential than flesh. It was hope, she realized. Hope was finally, irrevocably breaking. She'd held on to it for so long. Through her husband's death from typhoid 3 years prior, through the loss of their small farm when she couldn't work it alone, through every slight and insult and wandering hand in this miserable town. She told herself that if she just worked hard enough, kept her head down, minded her manners, things would get better. But things didn't get better. Not for women like her. Not in places like this. Just close your eyes, she thought. Close your eyes and let go. It'll be easier that way. The sun was making her dizzy, or maybe that was blood loss, or maybe both. June's eyes began to drift shut, her consciousness starting to slip away from the pain, from the humiliation, from the awful knowing that nobody cared whether she lived or died. Then she heard it. A sound so ordinary, so out of place, that at first she thought she might be hallucinating. The steady, rhythmic clip-clop of a horse's hooves on hard-packed earth. The sound grew closer, stopped. She heard leather creaking, a saddle settling as its rider dismounted, boots on the ground moving toward her with purposeful strides. "Jesus Christ," a man's voice breathed, and it was a voice June had never heard before, deep and rough and carrying an accent that suggested origins somewhere north and east of Texas. She forced her eyes open, squinting against the brutal sunlight. A shape moved into her limited field of vision, blocking out the sun, and for a moment all June could see was a silhouette. Broad shoulders, a wide-brimmed hat, the unmistakable outline of a gun belt slung low on narrow hips. Then he crouched down, bringing his face level with hers, and June found herself looking into the most extraordinary eyes she'd ever seen. They were gray, not the soft gray of morning mist, but the dark, turbulent gray of storm clouds rolling in before a twister. Eyes that had seen violence and delivered it, eyes that missed nothing, eyes that looked at her not with pity or disgust, but with something she couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of one broken thing seeing another. "Easy now," the man said softly. "Don't try to move. Let me look at you first." His hands, large, calloused, surprisingly gentle, moved over her with practiced efficiency, checking for breaks, assessing damage. June wanted to tell him to stop, that she was fine, that he should just leave her alone before Blake and his friends decided to come back and start on him too, but she couldn't seem to make her voice work, so she just lay there, barely breathing, while this stranger's careful hands catalogued her injuries. Ribs broken, arm might be dislocated, lot of bruising, cuts. He sat back on his heels, his jaw tight with what looked like barely controlled anger. "Who did this to you?" June managed to work her mouth enough to croak out a single word. "Don't. Don't what? Don't ask. Don't get involved. They'll what?" The man's voice had gone very quiet, and June had heard enough violence in her life to recognize the particular quality of that quiet. It was the stillness before a gun fired. "Tell me their names." "Please," June whispered. "Just leave me. Not your problem." Something shifted in those storm cloud eyes, something that might have been pain or might have been fury or might have been both. The man stood up, his movements fluid despite his size, and June heard the distinctive sound of a revolver being drawn from its holster. "Oh God," she thought, "he's going to start shooting. There's going to be more blood, more death." But the gun didn't fire. Instead, the man walked a few paces away from her, his boots crunching in the dirt, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the nearly empty street with the clarity of a church bell. "The men who did this. I know you're watching. I know you're close by, feeling real proud of yourselves for beating on a woman half your size." A pause, loaded with menace. "I'm giving you one chance to make this right. One chance to come out here and face someone who can fight back." Silence. June tried to turn her head to see what was happening, but the movement sent such a wave of nausea through her that she had to stop, breathing hard through her nose. "No? Nobody wants to step up?" The man's voice dripped with contempt. "Didn't think so. Cowards rarely do." He holstered his gun and returned to June's side, and this time when he crouched down, there was a softness in his expression that contrasted sharply with the hardness in his voice moments before. "I'm going to pick you up now," he said. "It's going to hurt. I'm sorry for that. But I can't leave you lying in the street like this." "Don't—" June tried to protest, but her voice failed again. "Yeah, I know. Not my problem. Don't get involved." The man slipped one arm under her knees, another behind her shoulders, cradling her broken body against his chest as he stood. "Well, I never was good at minding my own business." The pain of being moved was extraordinary. June couldn't help the cry that escaped her lips, couldn't stop the tears that spilled from her eyes. But through it all, she was aware of the steadiness of the man's hold, the way he adjusted his grip to cause her the least possible discomfort, the gentleness with which he navigated the step up onto the boardwalk. "Doc Brennan," he called out, "I need you, now!" A door opened somewhere to June's right. "Good Lord, what happened?" "What does it look like happened?" The man's voice was tight with controlled rage. 3 men decided to teach a lesson to a woman who couldn't defend herself. "Where do you want her?" "Back room, this way." June felt herself being carried through a doorway into blessedly cool dimness. The smell of carbolic and laudanum filled her nose, the distinctive scent of a doctor's surgery. She was lowered onto something soft, a table, maybe, or a cot. "I'll need to examine her properly," Doc Brennan was saying. "You'll have to wait outside." "Like hell I will." "This is a medical examination, not a public spectacle. Out." A long pause. Then, incredibly, June felt a hand close gently around hers. The stranger's hand, rough and warm and somehow comforting. "I'll be right outside that door," he said. And though he was speaking to the doctor, June knew the words were meant for her. "Nobody's going to hurt you again. I give you my word on that." June wanted to tell him that words didn't mean much in Sweetwater Creek, that promises were as worthless as Confederate scrip, that he should just leave while he still could. But she was so tired and the pain was so immense, and there was something in his voice, some fundamental quality of steadiness, that made her want to believe him. So instead of protesting, she squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. The pressure was returned, firm and reassuring. Then the hand withdrew, and June heard boots moving away, a door opening and closing. "All right, miss," Doc Brennan said, his voice kind but clinical. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." "Kia." Outside the doctor's office, Gage Walker stood with his back against the wall and his hand resting on the butt of his Colt, watching the street with eyes that missed nothing. He'd ridden into Sweetwater Creek not 20 minutes ago, looking for nothing more than a hot meal and a bed that didn't move under him like his horse did. Instead, he'd found a woman being beaten in the street while good people looked the other way. He'd seen a lot of ugly things in his 31 years. He'd fought Comanche raiders on the Llano Estacado. He'd hunted outlaws through the brush country for the Texas Rangers. He'd stood over dead men he'd killed and felt nothing but relief that it was them instead of him. But there was something about seeing that woman curled in the dirt, something about the way nobody moved to help her, that had lit a fire in his chest he'd thought long extinguished. Maybe it was because she reminded him of someone. Maybe it was just the principle of the thing. Or maybe, and Gage suspected this was the real truth, maybe he was just tired of watching people suffer while other people profited from it. He'd been a Texas Ranger for 8 years before everything went to hell. He'd believed in the law then, believed in justice and order and the idea that good men could make a difference if they just tried hard enough. Then Calvin Briggs had taught him differently, had shown him in the most brutal way possible that sometimes the law wasn't enough, that sometimes evil won, that sometimes good men died while bad men prospered. Gage's hand tightened on his gun as the memory tried to surface. Emma's face, the children's voices, the smell of smoke and blood and burning wood. He forced it down, shoved it back into the locked box in his mind where he kept all the things he couldn't afford to think about and still function. The door opened behind him. Doc Brennan stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag that was stained with blood. "Well?" Gage asked. Gage. 3 broken ribs, 1 cracked. Dislocated left shoulder. I got it back in, but she'll need to keep it immobilized. Severe bruising over most of her torso and back. Cuts and abrasions. Possible concussion." The doctor's mouth was tight. "She's lucky they didn't kill her." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Gage said flatly. "They stopped because someone told them to. Sheriff, probably. Didn't want the inconvenience of an actual corpse." Doc Brennan sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60-odd years. "You're not wrong. Blake Harker and his friends, they've been getting away with things for a while now. Smaller things than this, but, well, Blake's father is wealthy and the boys work for wealthy men. That counts for a lot around here." "It shouldn't." "No, but it does." The doctor met Gage's eyes. "You planning to do something stupid about this?" "Depends on your definition of stupid." "Mr. Walker. Gage Walker." "Mr. Walker, I appreciate what you did, getting her off the street, bringing her here, But if you're thinking about going after Blake and his friends, I'd advise against it. They've got protection. You don't. I don't need protection, Gage said softly. I need about 30 seconds in clear line of sight. That kind of thinking will get you hanged, or shot, probably both. Gage turned to look fully at the doctor, and something in his expression must have communicated itself clearly, because Brennan actually took a step back. I've been shot before, Gage said. Hasn't taken yet. And as for hanging, he shrugged. They'd have to catch me first. Before the doctor could respond, the door opened again, and a woman stuck her head out. Brennan's wife, Gage guessed from the proprietary way she looked at the doctor. She's asking for you, Mrs. Brennan said, looking at Gage. The girl. She wants to talk to you. Gage pushed off the wall and moved toward the door, but Doc Brennan caught his arm. Don't make promises you can't keep, the old man said quietly. That girl's been disappointed enough for one lifetime. Then I won't make promises, Gage replied. I'll just tell her the truth. He stepped into the back room, letting his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. The woman, the girl really, though God knew she'd probably aged 10 years in the last hour, lay on a cot against the far wall, her torso wrapped in bandages, her left arm in a sling, her face a mask of purple and yellow bruises. Someone had cleaned the blood and dirt away, but there was no hiding the damage. Yet when she looked at him, her eyes were clear. Hurt and wary, yes, but clear, unbroken in the ways that mattered most. You're still here, she said, her voice rough but steady. Told you I would be. Most men lie. I'm not most men. June studied him for a long moment, and Gage had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and measured, of this battered woman somehow seen through all the walls he'd built around himself. Why did you help me? She finally asked. It was a fair question. Gage considered several answers, because it was the right thing to do, because nobody else would, because he couldn't just ride past, and discarded them all as insufficient. Once, he said slowly, I rode past someone who needed help. I was in a hurry, had somewhere to be, someone to chase. Figured somebody else would stop, somebody else would help. He paused, the memory tasting like ash. Nobody did, and by the time I came back through that way, it was too late. What happened to them? They died. Because I didn't stop. Gage met her eyes squarely. I don't ride past anymore. June absorbed this, her fingers plucking at the blanket covering her legs. The men who did this, Blake Harker, Virgil Kane, Pete Sutter, they'll do it again if they see me. Or worse, and the law won't stop them. Sheriff Dugan's been in the Harkers' pocket for years. Then the laws failed, Gage said simply. Wouldn't be the first time. So what do I do? Hide? Run? Both of those just put off the inevitable. Or you could come with me. The words surprised him almost as much as they clearly surprised her. Gage hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even consciously thought them, but as soon as they left his mouth, he knew they were right. Come with you where? June asked warily. I've got a ranch about 15 miles north of here. Small place, not much to look at, but it's mine, clear and free. House needs work. Could use someone to help with that. He shrugged. Could use the company if I'm being honest. Gets quiet out there alone. You don't know anything about me. Know you're brave. Know you're tough. Know you could have just laid down and died out there, but you kept fighting. Gage tilted his head. Know you didn't deserve what happened to you. That's enough for me. I don't need charity, June said, and there was steel in her voice despite its roughness. Good, because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering work. You'd earn your keep, cooking, cleaning, helping with the house, and maybe the stock if you're interested in learning. I'd pay you fair wages, give you your own room, expect you to pull your weight. Only difference between you and any other ranch hand is you'd be sleeping inside instead of in the bunkhouse. And that's all you'd expect? Work? Gage understood the real question, understood the fear behind it. He'd seen what men could do to women they had power over. Hell, he'd arrested more than a few of them back in his ranger days. That's all, he said firmly. I'm not... He stopped, searching for words. I'm not that kind of man. Won't claim to be a saint, but I don't force myself on women. Don't hurt people who can't fight back. Don't much like people who do. He held her gaze. You'd be safe. I swear it on whatever you want me to swear on. June was quiet for so long that Gage thought she might refuse. Then slowly she nodded. All right, she said softly. All right, Mr. Walker. I'll come with you. Gage, he corrected. Just Gage. June. June Talbot. Pleased to meet you properly, June. Gage touched the brim of his hat. Though I wish it was under better circumstances. Me too, June said, and something that might have been a smile ghosted across her battered face. Me too. 3 days later, just before dawn, Gage helped June into the wagon he'd procured from the town's livery. Doc Brennan had wanted her to rest longer, but June had been adamant. She wanted out of Sweetwater Creek as soon as physically possible, and Gage couldn't blame her. The town was stirring as they drove through, early risers beginning their morning routines, smoke starting to curl from chimneys. A few people stared as the wagon passed, but nobody spoke, nobody waved. These were the same people who'd watched June get beaten and done nothing. Gage would remember every face. They were almost clear of the town limits when 3 men stepped into the road ahead, forcing Gage to pull back on the reins. Blake Harker, Virgil Kane, Pete Sutter. Gage felt June go rigid beside him, felt her fear like a palpable thing. His right hand dropped casually to rest on his thigh, inches from his holstered Colt. Morning, boys, he said pleasantly. Something I can help you with? That's our property you got there, Blake said, gesturing toward June. She owes Mr. Harker money, stole from his store. Can't just let her ride off before she pays what's owed. Funny, Gage replied, his voice still light. Doc Brennan told me she paid for everything she took. Said your father confirmed it. So either the doc's lying, or you are. He paused. I'm inclined to believe the doc. You calling me a liar? Blake's hand moved toward his gun. No need to call you what you obviously are. Now step aside. Or what? Virgil had moved to flank them, his own hand on his weapon. You're going to take on all 3 of us? Bad odds, stranger. Gage smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. Tell you what, we'll make it sporting. I'll give you the first move. You want to draw on me? Go ahead. See how that works out for you. For a long moment, nobody moved. The morning air was so still that Gage could hear Pete Sutter breathing, could see the sweat beading on Blake Harker's forehead despite the cool temperature. They were calculating, weighing their odds. 3 against 1. Except Gage had positioned himself in a way that gave him clear sightlines to all 3 men, and his hand was already near his gun, while theirs would have to travel farther. And there was something in his eyes, that flat, dead calm that came from having killed men before and knowing he could do it again, that made even brave men reconsider. Blake Harker was not a brave man. This ain't over, he said, but he was already stepping back, already backing down. You can't protect her forever. Don't need forever, Gage replied. Just need today. Now move. They moved. Gage clicked to the horses and the wagon rolled forward, passing between the 3 men like Moses parting the Red Sea. June didn't relax until they were a good mile out of town, until Sweetwater Creek was nothing but a collection of buildings shrinking behind them. Thank you, she said quietly. Nothing to thank me for. You could have just given me up. Would have been easier. Gage glanced at her, at this woman who'd taken a beating that would have broken most men and was still sitting upright, still looking forward instead of back. Where I come from, he said, we don't give up our people. And as of 3 days ago, Miss Talbot, you're my people. Better get used to it. June didn't respond, but Gage saw her shoulders relax slightly, saw something in her eyes that might have been the first fragile stirring of hope. They rode on as the sun climbed higher, the wagon wheels turning, the horses steady, 2 broken people heading toward something that might, if they were lucky, if they were careful, if they were brave enough, be a second chance. Behind them, Sweetwater Creek faded into the distance. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain and dangerous and possible. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, June Talbot thought she might actually live to see it. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun reached its zenith, shimmering in the heat like something out of a fever dream. June had dozed fitfully during the journey, her body demanding rest despite her mind's refusal to fully surrender consciousness. Each jolt of the wagon sent fresh pain through her broken ribs, each breath a reminder of what Blake Harker and his friends had done to her. But she didn't complain. Complaining wouldn't change anything, and besides, she'd learned long ago that nobody really wanted to hear about a woman's pain. "Almost there," Gage said, his voice cutting through her half-sleeping state. "Not much to look at, but it's home." June forced her eyes open and looked where he was pointing. The ranch sat in a small valley between two gentle rises of land, protected from the worst of the wind, but still open enough to catch whatever breeze might offer relief from the relentless Texas heat. The house itself was modest, a single-story structure of rough-hewn logs and plank siding with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides. The roof looked sound, at least from this distance, though the whole place had an air of neglect about it, as if its owner had been going through the motions of living without really inhabiting the space. Behind the house stood a barn that had seen better days, its red paint faded to a rusty brown, and beyond that, a series of corrals and outbuildings in various states of repair. She could see horses in one of the corrals, 3 of them, sturdy-looking animals that raised their heads to watch as the wagon approached. "It needs work," Gage continued, and June detected something almost apologetic in his tone. "Place kind of got away from me these past couple years. But the bones are good. Built it myself, mostly. Foundation solid, walls are tight, roof doesn't leak much." "It's fine," June said, and meant it. Compared to the widow's shack she'd been living in back in Sweetwater Creek, a place barely larger than a chicken coop, with gaps in the walls wide enough to see daylight through, this looked like a palace. "It's more than fine." Gage guided the wagon up to the house and set the brake. Before June could attempt to climb down herself, he was around to her side, reaching up to help her. His hands were careful, mindful of her injuries, and June found herself once again struck by the contradiction this man presented, so clearly capable of violence, yet so unexpectedly gentle. "Easy now," he murmured, as her feet touched the ground. "Don't need you pulling anything loose that Doc Brennan put back together." June stood for a moment, letting her body adjust to being upright again, and looked around with clearer eyes. Up close, the ranch showed more signs of neglect than she'd noticed from a distance. The porch boards needed replacing in spots. Weeds had overtaken what might once have been a kitchen garden. One of the shutters hung crooked on its hinges, but underneath the neglect, she could see evidence of care. The careful joinery of the porch posts, the neat stone foundation, the way the whole structure had been positioned to catch the morning sun while staying shaded in the afternoon. "You said you built this yourself?" she asked. "Most of it. Had help with the heavy timber work, but yeah, the rest was me." Gage moved past her to unlock the front door. "Built it about 5 years back when I thought—" He stopped abruptly, and June saw his jaw tighten. "Well, when things were different." He pushed the door open and stepped inside, and after a moment's hesitation, June followed. The interior was dim and cool after the brightness outside, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she found herself standing in a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cast-iron stove set into it for cooking. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs occupied the center of the space. Against another wall stood a dresser and what looked like a rocking chair, though it was covered with a sheet. Everything was covered with a fine layer of dust, and the air had that stale quality of a place that hadn't been properly lived in for a long time. "Like I said," Gage muttered, surveying the space with what looked like embarrassment, "needs work." "It just needs cleaning," June replied, running a finger along the table and examining the dust that came away. "And maybe airing out. Nothing that can't be fixed with elbow grease and time." "Your room's through here." Gage crossed to a door on the right side of the main room and pushed it open. "Used to be. Well, it's yours now. Has a real bed, not just a cot. Window faces east, so you'll get morning light. There's hooks on the wall for hanging clothes and a trunk for storage." June moved to the doorway and peered inside. The room was small but adequate, with a single window covered by faded curtains, a narrow bed with a bare mattress, and the promised hooks and trunk. Like the main room, everything was covered in dust, but the bones were good. She could make this work. "It's perfect," she said, and saw something like relief flicker across Gage's face. All right then, I'll bring in your things. Well, you don't really have things, do you? Doc Brennan's wife packed you a bag with some clothes she thought might fit. I'll grab that. He paused in the doorway, seeming suddenly uncertain. You should rest. I know you're probably sick of hearing that, but you took a hell of a beating, and the wagon ride out here didn't help. I've got work to do outside anyway. Horses need tending, fence line needs checking. You just make yourself comfortable, such as it is. Gage, June said, and he turned back. Thank you for all of this. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it. You didn't have to do any of this. He looked at her for a long moment, and June saw something complicated and painful move behind his eyes. Yeah, he said finally. I did. Get some rest, June. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, the front door closing behind him with a solid thunk. June stood alone in the main room of Gage Walker's house, listening to the silence. It was different from the silence of Sweetwater Creek. That had been the silence of people deliberately looking away, of cowardice dressed up as neutrality. This was just the natural quiet of a place far from other people, broken only by the distant sound of horses and the creak of wood settling in the heat. She should rest, she knew that. Her body was screaming for it, every breath a reminder of her broken ribs, every movement sending fresh aches through her bruised muscles. But June had never been good at resting, had never been able to simply sit still when there was work to be done. And looking around this dusty, neglected house, she could see plenty of work that needed doing. Besides, if she laid down now, she'd think. And thinking would lead her back to Sweetwater Creek, back to Blake Harker's fists and boots, back to the faces of all those people who'd watched and done nothing. She couldn't afford to go back there. Not even in her mind. Not yet. Maybe not ever. So instead, June set about making this house into something that felt less like a tomb and more like a home. She started with the basics, opening windows to let in fresh air, sweeping dust from surfaces, shaking out the sheet that covered the rocking chair. The work was harder than it should have been, her injuries making every movement an exercise in careful calculation. Reaching above her head pulled at her broken ribs, bending down made her dizzy. But she persisted, moving slowly and methodically, taking breaks when the pain got too intense, then starting again when it became bearable. As she worked, June began to notice things about the house. Small things that told stories about the man who lived here. The way the kitchen was laid out with surprising efficiency, everything within easy reach, suggesting someone who actually cooked rather than just heating beans from a can. The books on a shelf near the fireplace, not many, but well-worn, suggesting they'd been read multiple times. Poetry, she saw with some surprise. Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson. Not what she would have expected from a man who wore his gun with such casual competence. And then there were the things that suggested pain. The sheet-covered rocking chair that looked like it hadn't been uncovered in years. The door to what must be Gage's bedroom, firmly shut, with a heaviness about it that suggested he didn't go in there any more than absolutely necessary. The photograph on the mantel, the only photograph in the whole house, that she couldn't quite see from where she stood but could tell showed people, a family maybe, that Gage clearly couldn't bear to look at, but equally couldn't bear to pack away. This house was haunted, June realized, not by ghosts in the supernatural sense, but by memories, by loss, by whatever had happened to turn a clearly capable, intelligent man into someone who'd let his home fall into neglect and ate his meals standing at the counter rather than sitting at the table he'd built with his own hands. June knew about that kind of haunting. She'd lived with it herself since Thomas died. The way certain things, the smell of tobacco smoke, the sound of a particular hymn, the sight of a man's shirt collar at a certain angle, could transport her back to when her husband was alive, when her future had looked different, when she'd believed the world was fundamentally fair. But unlike Gage, June hadn't had the luxury of wallowing in her grief. She'd had to survive, had to keep moving, had to push through the pain because stopping meant death, metaphorical if not literal. Maybe that's what Gage needed too, a reason to keep moving, to stop just going through the motions and start actually living again. She was contemplating this, standing in front of that sheet-covered rocking chair, when the front door opened and Gage came in carrying a bucket of water. "Jesus Christ, woman," he said, stopping short when he saw her. "I told you to rest, not clean the whole damn house." "I rested," June lied, "and I needed something to do. Couldn't just lie in bed staring at the ceiling." Gage set the bucket down with a thump. "You're white as a ghost and swaying on your feet. Sit down before you fall down." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're beat to hell and barely holding yourself together through sheer stubbornness." He crossed to her in 3 long strides and took her arm, gently, always gently, steering her toward one of the chairs at the table. "Sit. That's not a request." June sat, mostly because her legs had started trembling and she wasn't sure how much longer she could stay upright. The room tilted slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table until it steadied. "You're going to hurt yourself," Gage said, and now he sounded more worried than angry. "Doc Brennan said you need at least a week of rest for those ribs to start healing properly. Throwing yourself into housework on your first day here isn't going to help anything." "I needed to be useful," June said quietly. "I needed to feel like I wasn't just taking from you, like I was earning my place here." Gage pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily, running a hand through his dark hair in what looked like a habitual gesture of frustration. "June, listen to me. You don't have to earn anything. Not yet. Not until you're healed up enough to actually work without doing yourself more damage. Right now, your job is to get better. That's it." "I don't know how to just be," June admitted. "I've been working since I was 6 years old, taking care of my mama when she was sick, helping my daddy with the farm, then taking care of my husband, then taking in washing and mending after he died. I don't know how to sit still and let someone else take care of things." "Then you're going to learn," Gage said firmly. "Starting now. You're going to eat something. I'll cook, such as it is, and then you're going to go to bed and sleep until your body tells you to wake up. No arguments." June wanted to argue anyway, wanted to insist that she was fine, that she didn't need coddling, that she could handle more than he gave her credit for. But looking at his face, at the set of his jaw and the determined look in those storm cloud eyes, she realized that arguing would be pointless. Gage Walker had made up his mind, and June suspected that once he did that, moving him was about as easy as moving a mountain. "All right," she said finally, "but tomorrow? Tomorrow we'll see how you feel. One day at a time, June. That's how this works." He stood and moved to the kitchen area, pulling ingredients from the shelves in the cold box. Salt pork, beans, some withered potatoes, a few sad-looking onions. Nothing fancy, but June's stomach growled at the thought of actual food. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. Before the beating, certainly. Before Blake Harker's fist had driven into her stomach and made her throw up what little she'd had in there. She watched Gage work, noting the economical efficiency of his movements, the way he wielded a knife with the same casual competence he showed with his gun. He didn't talk while he cooked, and June didn't try to force conversation. The silence between them was surprisingly comfortable, companionable in a way that felt rare and precious. The food, when he served it, was simple but good. Beans and salt pork fried up with the potatoes and onions, seasoned with salt and pepper and something else she couldn't quite identify. They ate at the table, and June tried not to think about how long it had probably been since Gage had actually sat down for a meal like a civilized person instead of eating standing up or not at all. "You're a good cook," she said after a few bites. "I'm a functional cook," Gage corrected. "There's a difference. My wife—" He stopped abruptly, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, and June saw the color drain from his face. It was the first time he'd mentioned having a wife, and from his reaction, June understood that it hadn't been intentional. "You don't have to talk about it," she said softly. "Not if you don't want to." Gage set his fork down, his appetite apparently gone. "Her name was Emma," he said, his voice rough. "She was the one who was good at cooking. Made things taste like they actually mattered, you know? Like meals were occasions, not just fuel." He stared at his plate. "I haven't sat at this table since... It's been 3 years. I haven't been able to." June's heart ached for him, for the pain so clearly visible in every line of his body. "What happened?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked." "No, it's..." Gage rubbed his face with both hands. You should know. If you're going to be living here, you should know why I am the way I am. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the lengthening shadows. When he spoke again, his voice was distant, as if he was recounting something that had happened to someone else. I was a Texas Ranger. 8 years on the force, chasing outlaws and Comanche raiders and every other kind of trouble you could imagine. Good at my job. Maybe too good. Made a name for myself tracking men nobody else could find. And that's how I met Emma. Her brother was a ranger too. Got himself shot up pretty bad going after a gang of cattle rustlers. I rode with him to the hospital in Austin, and there she was, his sister, taking care of him. A ghost of a smile crossed Gage's face. Prettiest woman I'd ever seen. Smart too, and funny, and completely unimpressed by my reputation. We got married 6 months later. Built this house the year after that. Had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, Samuel and Mary. Thought I had everything figured out. His hands gripped the windowsill, knuckles going white. Then I got assigned to hunt Calvin Briggs. You heard of him? June shook her head. He is, one of the worst men I've ever had the misfortune to cross paths with. Killer, rapist, arsonist. Left a trail of bodies from the Rio Grande to the Oklahoma border. The Rangers wanted him bad, and they gave me the job of bringing him in. I was so damn sure of myself. So certain I'd catch him, make him pay for what he'd done. Gage turned from the window, and June saw that his eyes were wet. I chased him for months. Got close a few times, but he always slipped away. And while I was off chasing ghosts, Briggs sent his men here, to my home, to my family. June's breath caught in her throat. She didn't want to hear the rest, didn't want to know the terrible thing that had broken this strong man so completely. But she couldn't bring herself to stop him either. They killed them, Gage said flatly. Emma, Samuel, Mary, burned the house, this house, with them inside it. Left a message carved into the barn door. Stop chasing or more people die. By the time I got word and rode back, there was nothing left but ashes and bodies. Oh God, June whispered. Gage, I'm so sorry. I quit the Rangers that day. Couldn't stomach the idea of working for justice when justice had failed me so completely. Rebuilt the house, had to, needed something to do with my hands, needed to, I don't know, prove that Briggs hadn't won completely. But I couldn't make it feel like home again. Every room, every corner, all I could see was them, what I'd lost, what I'd failed to protect. He moved back to the table but didn't sit, just gripped the back of his chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. That's why I stopped when I saw you in the street. Because I couldn't, his voice cracked. I couldn't ride past someone who needed help. Not again. Not after what happened when I was too busy chasing the wrong thing to protect what mattered. June stood, ignoring the pain in her ribs, and crossed to where Gage stood. She didn't touch him, didn't think he'd welcome it, but she positioned herself where he had to look at her instead of into the past. What happened to your family wasn't your fault, she said firmly. You didn't kill them. Calvin Briggs did. His men did. You were trying to protect other people from the same man who eventually hurt your family. There's no shame in that. I should have been here, Gage said, his voice breaking. I should have protected them. You can't protect everyone from everything. Nobody can. The world's too cruel for that. June reached out tentatively and placed her hand over his where it gripped the chair. But you saved me. That has to count for something. Gage looked down at her hand on his, and something in his expression shifted. Not healing exactly, but maybe the first hint that healing might someday be possible. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe it does. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 broken people finding unexpected solace in shared pain. Then Gage gently extracted his hand and cleared his throat. You should get some rest, he said, his voice rough but steadier. It's been a long day. June wanted to argue, wanted to stay and talk more, to somehow ease the terrible burden she could see him carrying. But her body had reached its limit. The combination of pain, exhaustion, and emotional intensity had left her feeling wrung out and hollow. All right, she agreed. But Gage, thank you for telling me, for trusting me with that. He nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. Good night, June. Good night. June made her way to the small bedroom Gage had given her, each step an effort. The bed looked impossibly inviting, and she sank onto it with a groan of relief. Someone, Gage, she assumed, had made it up with clean sheets while she'd been cleaning the main room. The pillowcase smelled of soap and sunshine, and the mattress, while not fancy, was infinitely more comfortable than the thin pallet she'd been sleeping on in Sweetwater Creek. She lay back carefully, arranging her battered body into the least painful position possible, and stared at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear Gage moving around in the main room, the clink of dishes being washed, the creak of floorboards, the sound of the door opening and closing as he went out to check on the horses one final time before full dark. June had thought she was too keyed up to sleep, her mind too full of everything that had happened, the beating, the rescue, the journey here, the terrible story of Gage's loss. But her body had other ideas. Within minutes, she felt herself drifting, consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. Her last coherent thought before sleep claimed her was that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. June would wake with the sun, her body slowly adjusting to the absence of constant fear. She'd find breakfast waiting for her. Gage was always up before dawn, had usually already done half a day's work by the time she emerged from her room. They'd eat together at the table, conversations gradually becoming easier, less weighted with the terrible knowledge of shared trauma. Then Gage would head out to work the ranch while June, moving carefully within the limits of her healing body, continued the project of making the house livable. She washed curtains and hung them to dry in the sun. She scrubbed floors until the wood gleamed. She organized the kitchen, throwing out things that had gone bad and making lists of supplies they'd need on Gage's next trip to town. Not Sweetwater Creek, he assured her, but a larger settlement called Red Rock, about 30 miles west. I don't go to Sweetwater Creek if I can help it, he'd told her. Town's rotten. Figured that out long before what happened to you. As she worked, June began to reclaim pieces of herself that she'd thought lost. The act of creating order from chaos, of making something better through her own efforts, reminded her that she was more than just a victim, more than just the woman who'd been beaten in the street while good people watched. But it wasn't just the work that was healing her. It was Gage himself. He was, June discovered, surprisingly easy to live with. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He was tidy, without being fastidious, pulling his own weight in the household chores, even though he'd hired her specifically to handle them. He was respectful of her space and her privacy, never entering her room without knocking, never pressing her to talk about things she wasn't ready to discuss. And he was patient with her limitations. When June pushed herself too hard one day, trying to wash all the bedding in one marathon session, and ended up pale and trembling on the front porch steps, Gage had simply finished the job himself, then brought her a glass of cool water and sat with her in companionable silence until her breathing steadied. You don't have to prove anything, he'd said quietly. Not to me, not to yourself. Healing takes time. I'm not used to taking time, June had replied. I'm used to just pushing through. Yeah, I know that feeling. Gage had looked out at the horizon, his expression distant. But there's a difference between being tough and being stubborn, and pushing yourself too hard when you're healing is just stubborn. Your body's trying to fix itself. Let it do its job. June had wanted to argue, but looking at him, at this man who was clearly speaking from hard-won experience, she'd found she couldn't. So she'd just nodded and sipped her water and tried to accept that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to not be okay for a while. A week passed, then two. June's bruises faded from purple to yellow to green, then gradually disappeared. Her ribs stopped screaming with every breath and settled into a dull ache that was bearable, then barely noticeable. Her shoulder regained its range of motion. The cuts healed, leaving thin pink lines that would eventually fade to silver. And as her body healed, June found herself settling into life at the ranch in ways she hadn't anticipated. She started cooking their meals, discovering that Gage had been understating his abilities. He was indeed functional, But June had a gift for making even simple ingredients sing. The first time she made biscuits from scratch, light and fluffy, and served with butter and honey, Gage had stared at them like she'd performed a miracle. "Emma used to make biscuits like these," he'd said quietly, and June had held her breath, waiting to see if the comparison would hurt him. But instead, he'd smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "Thank you." She also discovered that she had a way with the horses. Gage kept 3 of them, his own mount, a rangy buckskin gelding named Dust, a sturdy bay mare called Rosie who did most of the heavy work around the ranch, and a younger paint horse named Patches who was still being trained. June had always liked horses, had helped her father with them on the farm when she was young, and she found herself drawn to the barn in the afternoons when the worst of the heat had passed. "You've got good hands," Gage observed one evening, watching her brush down Rosie with long, steady strokes. "Horses can tell when someone's afraid of them or trying to dominate them. You're doing neither, just being with them." "My daddy used to say that horses are honest," June replied, running the brush along Rosie's neck. "They don't lie about how they're feeling or what they need. If you're willing to listen, they'll tell you everything." "Smart man, your father." "He was." June paused in her brushing, memory washing over her. "Died when I was 15. Drought took our crops, took our livestock. Took him too, eventually. His heart just gave out from the stress of it all. Mama followed him within the year. That's when I married Thomas. Didn't love him, not really, but I needed someone to take care of me and he needed someone to take care of his house. It worked mostly until the typhoid took him." She'd never said it out loud before, the truth about her marriage, about the transactional nature of what everyone in town had thought was a love match. But somehow, here in the quiet of the barn, with only Gage and the horses to hear, it felt safe to be honest. "Did you love him?" Gage asked. "Gage. Eventually, I mean. Did it grow into something real?" June considered the question carefully. "I cared for him. I was grateful to him. And I mourned him when he died, because he was a good man who deserved better than being sick and alone and afraid. But love?" She shook her head. "No, I don't think I ever loved him. I'm not sure I knew how." "You were young." "I was desperate," June corrected. "There's a difference." They fell into silence, but it was the comfortable kind that had become familiar between them. June returned to brushing Rosie, and Gage leaned against the stall door, watching in that still way he had, like he was cataloging every detail for future reference. "Can I ask you something?" June said after a while. "Sure." "Why haven't you hired anyone else to help with the ranch? It's a lot for one man to handle alone. The horses, the cattle, the maintenance. You could afford to bring on a hand or two." Gage was quiet for so long that June thought he might not answer. Then he sighed. "After Emma and the kids died, I couldn't stand having other people around. Couldn't stand their sympathy, their careful words, the way they'd look at me like I might break at any moment. So I sent away the hands I had and decided to manage alone. Told myself it was about privacy, about not wanting strangers on my land. But really, it was about not having to see the pity in their eyes every day." "And now?" June prompted gently. "Now, I don't know. Having you here, it's different. You don't look at me like I'm broken. You look at me like I'm just a man. That's—" He paused, searching for words. "That's good. That's what I needed without knowing I needed it." June felt warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in so long she almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't attraction exactly, though she'd be lying if she said she hadn't noticed how Gage looked when he was working. The strength in his shoulders, the capable grace of his movements. But it was something deeper than that, something more fundamental. It was recognition. The sense of being truly seen by another person, not as a victim or a burden or a transaction, but as an equal. "You don't look at me like I'm broken either," she said softly. "Even though I am." "You're not broken," Gage said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference." June set down the brush and turned to face him fully. "We're both healing then. Maybe that's why this works. We're broken in ways that fit together." Gage held her gaze, and June saw something shift in his expression. a crack in the armor he wore, a glimpse of the man he'd been before tragedy reshaped him. "Yeah," he said quietly, "maybe that's exactly it." The moment stretched between them, charged with something June couldn't quite name. Then Rosie snorted and shook her head, breaking the spell, and they both laughed, a little awkwardly, a little relieved. "I should start dinner," June said, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth radiating from Gage's body in the cool dimness of the barn. "I'll finish up here and be in shortly," Gage replied, stepping back to give her room to pass. June walked back to the house in the gathering dusk, her mind churning. Something was changing between them, something that went beyond simple gratitude or shared trauma. She wasn't sure what to call it yet, wasn't sure if she should encourage it or resist it. All she knew was that for the first time since Thomas died, maybe for the first time in her entire life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. That night, June made stew from salt pork and vegetables from Gage's struggling garden, which she'd started trying to resurrect. They ate at the table that Gage was finally getting comfortable sitting at, talking about small things, the fence that needed mending, the neighbor's cattle that had wandered onto the property, June's plans for planting herbs in the kitchen garden. After dinner, as June washed dishes and Gage dried them, a routine they'd fallen into without discussion, he suddenly spoke. "I'm glad you're here, June. I know that's probably strange to say given how you ended up here, but I want you to know that this, you being here, it's making things better, making me better." June's hands stilled in the dishwater. "You're making me better too," she said honestly. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I don't feel like I'm just surviving. I feel like I might actually be living." Gage set down the dish he'd been drying and turned to face her. "Then let's make a promise, you and me. We'll keep doing that. Keep living instead of just surviving. Keep moving forward instead of staying stuck in the past. Deal?" June dried her hands on her apron and extended one to him. "Deal." Gage took her hand, his grip warm and firm and solid, and June felt that crack in her own armor widen just a little bit more. They shook on it, this promise between two wounded people, and June thought that maybe, just maybe, they might actually be able to keep it. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her, June realized that the fear that had been her constant companion for so long had finally, quietly, begun to recede. She wasn't afraid anymore, not of the dark, not of the future, not of the vulnerability of letting someone matter to her. Blake Harker had tried to break her in that Sweetwater Creek street. But here, in this house built by a grieving man who'd given her a second chance, June was becoming something stronger than she'd ever been before. She was becoming herself, not someone's wife, not someone's victim, not someone defined by what had been done to her or what she'd lost. Just June, just herself. And for the first time in her life, that felt like enough. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, its voice lonely and wild and free. June closed her eyes and let sleep take her, and her dreams, for once, were peaceful. The peace lasted exactly 3 weeks and 4 days. June knew because she'd been counting, not out of fear that it would end, but out of wonder that it had begun at all. 3 weeks and 4 days of waking without dread, of working without looking over her shoulder, of sitting on the porch with Gage in the evenings and watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink while they talked about everything and nothing. 3 weeks and 4 days of feeling almost normal, almost whole, almost safe. Then the riders came. It was late afternoon, and June was in the kitchen garden pulling weeds from around the tomato plants she'd coaxed back to life. The heat had broken slightly, autumn finally making its presence known in the cooling evenings and the subtle shift in the quality of light. She'd pushed her sleeves up past her elbows and tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and she was humming, actually humming, as she worked. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through her contentment like a knife. June straightened slowly, her hand going instinctively to the small of her back where she'd taken to carrying the derringer Gage had given her 2 weeks prior. "Just in case," he'd said. "Probably won't need it, but I'd feel better knowing you had it." She'd protested that she didn't know how to shoot, and he'd spent the next 3 evenings teaching her, his hands guiding hers, his voice patient as he explained about sightlines and trigger pull and breathing steady. Now, As she watched three riders crest the ridge to the east and start down toward the ranch, June was grateful for those lessons. Her fingers closed around the Derringer's handle, drawing comfort from its solid weight. The riders were still too far away to make out clearly, but something about the way they moved, the deliberate quality of their approach, the way they spread out as they got closer, made the hair on the back of June's neck stand up. These weren't neighbors stopping by for a friendly visit. These were men with purpose, and June had learned the hard way that when men rode with purpose, women like her usually suffered for it. She backed toward the house, keeping her eyes on the approaching riders, and called out, "Gage!" He emerged from the barn almost immediately, his own hand already on his gun, his eyes scanning the horizon until they found what she'd seen. June watched his entire body go rigid, watched his face transform from relaxed to something hard and dangerous in the space of a heartbeat. "Get in the house," he said, his voice flat and cold in a way she'd never heard before. "Lock the doors. Don't come out unless I tell you to." "Who are they?" June asked, even as she continued backing toward the porch. "Trouble." Gage moved to intercept the riders, positioning himself between them and the house, between them and June. "Go. Now." June went, but she didn't lock herself inside like some helpless maiden in a storybook. Instead, she positioned herself just inside the doorway where she could see and hear everything while remaining mostly out of sight. The Derringer was in her hand now, and her thumb rested on the hammer, ready to cock it if needed. The three riders pulled up about 20 feet from where Gage stood, their horses stamping and blowing. June could see them clearly now, hard men, all of them, with the kind of faces that advertise violence as casually as a store might advertise dry goods. The one in the middle was older than the other two, maybe 50, with a scar running from his left eye down to his jaw. He wore his guns low on his hips, and there was something about the way he sat his horse that spoke of absolute confidence in his ability to use them. "Gage Walker," the scarred man said, and his voice was surprisingly cultured, almost pleasant. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough, Dutch," Gage replied. "What do you want?" "Now, is that any way to greet an old acquaintance? We've ridden a long way. Least you could do is offer us some water for our horses." "My well's over there." Gage jerked his head toward the trough by the barn, without taking his eyes off the riders. "Help yourselves, then ride out." Dutch, if that was really his name, smiled, and it was the most unsettling thing June had ever seen. "Can't do that, I'm afraid. We've got business with you." "I'm out of the business. Have been for 3 years. See, that's the thing about our line of work. You're never really out. Not when you know what you know. Not when you've seen what you've seen." Dutch leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "Calvin wants to talk to you." The name hit Gage like a physical blow. June saw him flinch, saw his hand tighten on his gun, saw 3 years of carefully maintained control threaten to shatter. "Calvin Briggs can go to hell," Gage said, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "And you can tell him I said so." "Now, Gage, let's be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Gage's laugh was harsh and ugly. "He murdered my family. He burned them alive. And you want me to be reasonable?" Dutch shrugged. "That was business. Nothing personal. You were getting too close, making too much noise. Calvin had to send a message." "A message." Gage took a step forward, and June saw the two younger riders tense, their hands moving toward their weapons. "He killed my wife. He killed my children. That's the message he sent. And the message was received. You stopped chasing him. You quit the Rangers. You disappeared." Dutch's smile widened. "Which is exactly what Calvin wanted. But now he's got a new problem, and he thinks you might be able to help him with it." "I wouldn't help Calvin Briggs find water in a rainstorm. Not even if he made it worth your while? Not even if he promised to leave you alone for good? Let you live out your days in peace on this little ranch of yours?" Dutch's eyes flicked toward the house, and June knew with sick certainty that he'd seen her. "You got yourself a woman now, I hear. Pretty little thing from Sweetwater Creek. Sure would be a shame if something happened to her." The change in Gage was instantaneous. One moment he was standing still, the next his gun was in his hand, the barrel pointed directly at Dutch's chest. The two younger riders went for their own weapons, but Gage's voice stopped them cold. "Touch her. and I'll kill all three of you before your bodies hit the ground. That's not a threat. That's a promise. Dutch raised his hand slowly, carefully, his expression never changing. Easy now, Gage. Nobody's threatening anybody. I'm just saying, Calvin remembers what happened last time. Remembers how you lost everything because you wouldn't stop chasing him. Seems to me you'd want to avoid a repeat of that particular tragedy. Get off my land, Gage said, and his voice had gone quiet again, which somehow made it more terrifying. Right now. And you tell Calvin that if he or any of his men come within 10 miles of this place, I'll finish what I started 3 years ago. I'll hunt him down, and I'll make him pay for every breath he's taken since Emma died. Big words from a man who couldn't protect his own family. June didn't see Gage move. 1 second he was standing 10 feet from Dutch's horse. The next he'd crossed the distance and dragged the man from his saddle, his gun pressed against Dutch's temple, his free hand fisted in the man's shirt. Say that again, Gage whispered. I dare you. The two younger riders had their guns out now, pointed at Gage, but nobody was moving, nobody was breathing. June's own gun was up and aimed, though she wasn't sure at which target, wasn't sure she could even hit anything from this distance. But she'd try. God help her, if those men shot Gage, she'd try. All right, Dutch said, his cultivated calm finally cracking. Point made. Let me up and we'll go. Gage held him for a moment longer, and June could see the war being fought behind his eyes. The desire to pull the trigger, to end this man's life and send a message back to Calvin Briggs written in blood. But finally, slowly, he released Dutch and stepped back, his gun still trained on the man's center mass. Dutch climbed to his feet, dusting off his clothes with shaking hands. You're making a mistake, Walker. Calvin's offering you a chance to square things, to put the past behind you both. You're too damn stubborn to take it. The past can't be put behind me, not as long as Calvin Briggs draws breath. Now get on your horse and ride before I change my mind about letting you leave. Dutch mounted up, his two companions still keeping their guns on Gage, and for a moment June thought it was going to go bad, thought someone was going to shoot, and then everyone would shoot and Gage would die, and she'd be alone again. But Dutch just nodded once, almost respectfully, and turned his horse. You'll be seeing us again, Walker. Calvin doesn't take no for an answer. Then he can come himself, Gage replied. I'll be waiting. The three riders spurred their horses and headed back the way they'd come, dust rising in their wake. Gage stood watching until they crested the ridge and disappeared, and only then did he lower his gun. June saw his hand trembling, saw his shoulders sag as the adrenaline started to drain away. She was out of the house and at his side before she'd consciously decided to move, her hand finding his arm, her touch grounding him back in the present. Gage, she said softly, come inside. He looked at her, and the anguish in his eyes was so raw, so exposed, that June felt her heart break for him all over again. They found me, he said, his voice hollow. I thought I was far enough away, thought I'd buried myself deep enough that they'd never find me, but they did. Who are they? Who's Calvin Briggs really, beyond what you already told me? Gage holstered his gun and ran both hands through his hair, the gesture one of profound exhaustion. Come inside. I'll tell you everything. You deserve to know what you've gotten yourself into by being here. They went into the house, and June guided Gage to the table, poured him a glass of whiskey from the bottle he kept in the cupboard but never touched, and sat down across from him. He stared at the whiskey for a long moment before taking a drink, and when he spoke, his voice was distant, detached. Calvin Briggs started out small, robberies, hold-ups, the usual outlaw business. But he was smart, smarter than most men in his line of work. Instead of just stealing and spending, he started building an organization. Recruited men who were good with guns, men who didn't mind getting their hands dirty. Started running protection rackets, taking cuts from other outlaws' operations, eliminating anyone who wouldn't pay or wouldn't cooperate. June listened, her hands wrapped around her own glass of water, her eyes never leaving Gage's face. By the time the Rangers got interested, Calvin controlled half the criminal activity between San Antonio and El Paso. We couldn't touch him. Every time we got close, witnesses would disappear or change their stories. Evidence would vanish. Lawmen who asked too many questions would end up dead in alleys. He had people everywhere, bought and paid for. But you kept after him, June said. I kept after him, became obsessed with it, if I'm being honest. Emma used to beg me to let it go, to let someone else handle it, but I couldn't. I'd seen what Calvin did to people. The families he destroyed, the lives he ruined. I wanted to be the one to bring him down. Gage took another drink, and June saw his hand shake as he set the glass down. I got close, too. Closer than anyone had gotten before. Found out about a meeting he was supposed to attend, set up an ambush. But someone tipped him off. Someone in the Rangers, we never found out who. Calvin didn't show, but he sent a message. He sent his men here. To your family, June whispered. I was 2 days right away when it happened. 2 days. If I'd been here, if I'd just been here. You would have died with them, June interrupted firmly. That's all that would have changed. You said it yourself. Calvin sent multiple men. You're good with a gun, but you're not invincible. They would have killed you too. Maybe that would have been better. Don't say that. June reached across the table and grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. Don't you dare say that. Emma wouldn't have wanted you to die with her. Your children wouldn't have wanted that. They'd want you to live, to remember them, to what? Gage's voice cracked. To avenge them? Because I couldn't even do that. I quit the Rangers and I came back here and I rebuilt this house, and I've spent 3 years doing nothing but existing. Not living, just existing. While Calvin Briggs continues to hurt people, continues to destroy lives. June was quiet for a moment, thinking about Blake Harker and his friends, about Sheriff Dugan who'd stood by and done nothing, about all the people in Sweetwater Creek who'd watched her get beaten and turned away. She understood the desire for justice, for vengeance, for making the people who hurt you understand what they'd done. What did they want? She asked. Dutch and those other men. What does Calvin want from you? I don't know. Dutch said Calvin wanted to talk, wanted my help with something. But Calvin doesn't ask for help unless he's desperate, and I can't imagine what would make him desperate enough to reach out to me. It's a trap, June said with certainty. It has to be. He wants to finish what he started, wants to make sure you're not going to come after him again. Probably. Gage stood and moved to the window, staring out at the darkening landscape. Or maybe he really does need something. Calvin's smart, but he's also pragmatic. If he thinks I can help him with something, if he thinks I'm more useful alive than dead, he'll use that. Might even be telling the truth about leaving me alone afterward, in his own twisted way. You're not seriously considering helping him, June said, appalled. Not after what he did. No, God, no, but I need to know what he wants, need to understand what's happening. Because one thing I learned from chasing Calvin, he doesn't make moves without a reason. If he sent men here, if he's willing to risk contact with me, something big is happening. June stood and crossed to where Gage stood, positioning herself so she could see his face. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, but I know one thing. I won't let what happened to Emma and the kids happen to you. I won't lose someone else because I wasn't careful enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't prepared enough. Gage, no, listen to me. He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to grip her shoulders gently but firmly. You need to leave, tomorrow. I'll give you money, enough to start over somewhere far from here, somewhere Calvin and his men will never find you. You can go to California, Oregon, hell, even back east if you want. But you can't stay here, it's not safe. I'm not leaving, June said flatly. June, I'm not leaving, she repeated, more forcefully this time. I've run before, Gage. I've hidden and hoped and prayed that if I just kept my head down, everything would be fine. And you know what? It doesn't work. Bad men find you anyway. Bad things happen anyway. The only difference is you're alone when they do. I'm trying to protect you. I know, and I'm grateful. But I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be locked away in a tower. I'm a grown woman who survived things you can't imagine, and I'm telling you right now, I'm staying. We face this together or not at all. Gage stared at her, and June watched emotions chase each other across his face. Frustration, fear, resignation, and something else, something that made her breath catch in her throat. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. We prepare. We make sure that if Calvin's men come back, and they will come back, we're ready for them. What do you need me to do? Can you shoot anything besides that Derringer? I can learn. Then tomorrow we start training. Really training, not just the basics. I'll teach you to use a rifle, how to reload under pressure, where to position yourself for the best defensive advantage. And we fortify the house. Barricades for the windows, extra ammunition stored in multiple locations, an escape route if things go bad. June nodded, feeling the weight of what they were discussing settle over her like a heavy coat. This was real. This was dangerous. People might die, probably would die, before this was over. But she'd meant what she said. She wasn't running. Not from this, not from Gage, not from whatever storm was coming. She'd spent her whole life being buffeted by forces beyond her control, being acted upon rather than acting. If Calvin Briggs's men came back, if violence found its way to this ranch again, at least this time she'd be ready. At least this time she wouldn't go down without a fight. That night, June lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. She could hear Gage moving around in the main room, the creak of floorboards, the scrape of furniture being moved. He was already starting the preparations, already thinking through scenarios and angles and defensive positions. June should have been terrified. A month ago, the thought of armed men coming to kill her would have sent her into a panic. But lying there in the darkness, all she felt was a strange, cold clarity. She'd been beaten. She'd been broken. She'd been left for dead in the street while good people watched. She'd survived all of that. She'd survived, and she'd found her way here, to this house, to this man who'd pulled her from the dust and given her a reason to keep fighting. Whatever came next, whatever darkness Calvin Briggs brought with him, June would face it standing up. She'd face it with Gage beside her, with a gun in her hand and fire in her blood. She'd face it the way Emma Walker probably would have faced it, protecting what was hers, defending the home she'd built, refusing to yield to the violence of evil men. June closed her eyes and let sleep take her, and if her dreams were troubled by visions of fire and blood and men on horseback, well, that was just preparation for what was to come. The next morning dawned cold and clear, with frost on the ground and their breath visible in the early morning air. June found Gage already outside, setting up targets at various distances from the house. He'd pulled out a rifle she hadn't seen before, a Winchester repeater, well-maintained and clearly familiar to his hands. "You ready?" he asked as she approached, the derringer tucked into her waistband and a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the chill. "Ready," June confirmed. For the next several hours, Gage put her through her paces. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to compensate for distance and wind. He taught her to load and reload, to clear jams, to make every shot count because in a real fight, you didn't get second chances. June's shoulders ached from the rifle's kick. Her hands cramped from gripping the stock. Her ears rang from the gunshots. But she kept at it, kept practicing, kept improving until she could hit a man-sized target at 50 yards more often than not. "Good," Gage said as she hit the target 3 times in a row. "That's good. You're a natural at this." "My father taught me to shoot squirrels when I was young," June said, lowering the rifle. "Said a woman should know how to feed herself if she needed to. Never thought I'd be using those lessons to shoot at people. Let's hope you don't have to. But if Calvin's men come back, if things go bad, I need to know you can defend yourself." Gage took the rifle from her and ejected the remaining rounds. "There's something else we need to talk about." June waited, sensing from his tone that whatever was coming wouldn't be pleasant. "If things get really bad, if it looks like they're going to overrun us, I need you to run. There's a trail that leads north from the back of the property, through the hills. Follow it about 5 miles and you'll hit the main road to Red Rock. From there you can get to the marshal, get help." "I'm not running while you stay behind to die," June said firmly. "I'm not planning on dying. But if it comes to that, I need to know you'll be safe." "That's non-negotiable, June." "Then we'll make a deal," June countered. "If things get that bad, we both run. Together. I won't leave you behind any more than you'll leave me behind." Gage opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "You really are the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "I prefer determined," June said with a small smile. "Stubborn sounds so negative." Despite everything, the danger, the fear, the knowledge that violence was coming, Gage laughed. It was brief but genuine, and June felt a warmth bloom in her chest at the sound. They spent the rest of the day fortifying the house. Gage moved furniture to create barriers, positioned weapons at strategic locations, and showed June the best angles for defending each room. He filled buckets with water, in case they try to burn us out, he explained grimly, and stocked the root cellar with supplies in case they needed to hole up for an extended period. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, June found herself on the porch with Gage, both of them exhausted from the day's preparations. They sat in the rocking chairs that had become their evening habit, not talking, just being present with each other in the fading light. "Do you think they'll come tonight?" June asked finally. "No. Dutch will report back to Calvin first, get his orders. We probably have a few days, maybe a week." Gage rocked slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon with the automatic vigilance of someone who'd spent years hunting and being hunted. "But they'll come. Calvin doesn't make idle threats." "What was he like? When you were hunting him, before everything happened? What kind of man is Calvin Briggs?" Gage was quiet for a long moment. Smart, careful, ruthless when he needs to be, but not needlessly cruel. He doesn't kill for pleasure. He kills because it serves a purpose, because it sends a message, or removes an obstacle. In some ways, that makes him more dangerous than the men who just enjoy violence. He's calculating, strategic. "You sound like you almost respect him." "I respect his capabilities, not his choices. There's a difference." Gage stopped rocking and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Calvin could have been anything. He's smart enough to have been a businessman, a politician, maybe even a lawman. But he chose this life, chose to hurt people for profit. That's what makes him evil. Not that he's cruel or sadistic, but that he looked at all the things he could be and chose to be this." June absorbed this, thinking about her own encounters with evil. Blake Harker wasn't smart or strategic. He was just petty and mean, a small man exercising power over someone weaker because it made him feel strong. But Calvin Briggs sounded different, sounded like the kind of enemy you couldn't defeat through simple courage or determination. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Terrified," Gage admitted quietly. "Not for myself. I stopped being afraid of dying 3 years ago. But for you. The thought of losing you the way I lost them." His voice caught. "I don't think I could survive that twice." June reached over and found his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then don't lose me. We'll fight together, survive together, and when this is over, we'll figure out what comes next. Together." Gage squeezed her hand, and they sat like that as the sun disappeared and the stars began to emerge. Two people bound by shared trauma and growing affection, preparing for a war neither had wanted, but both were determined to win. The peace had lasted 3 weeks and 4 days. Now, as night fell over the ranch and somewhere out in the darkness Calvin Briggs's men planned their next move, June and Gage prepared for whatever came next. They'd been broken before, both of them, shattered by violence and loss. But broken things, June had learned, could be made stronger in the mending, and she and Gage, wounded and scarred and still healing, were about to discover just how strong they'd become. The war was coming, but this time June wouldn't be beaten in the street while people looked away. This time, she'd stand and fight, and God help anyone who tried to bring her down. The attack came on the 5th night, just after midnight, when the moon hung fat and yellow in the Texas sky. June had been sleeping fitfully, her dreams populated by shadows and fire, when the first shot shattered the window of her bedroom and sent glass spraying across her bed. She was moving before her conscious mind caught up, rolling off the mattress and hitting the floor hard, her hand already reaching for the rifle Gage had positioned against the wall. "June!" Gage's voice bellowed from the main room. "Stay down! They're here!" More shots followed, a staccato rhythm of violence that punched holes through the wooden walls and sent splinters flying. June army-crawled to the doorway of her room, keeping below the level of the windows, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it over the gunfire. Through the doorway she could see Gage crouched behind the overturned table they'd positioned for exactly this purpose, his rifle already firing measured shots out the front window. "How many?" June called, having to shout to be heard over the cacophony. "At least 6, maybe more. They've got us surrounded." Gage fired again and June heard a scream from outside. One of the attackers hit, maybe killed. "Can you get to the back window?" June glanced to her right where the back wall of the house stood. The window Gage had fortified with shutters, now taking heavy fire. "Yes." "Go. Cover that side. Don't waste ammunition. Make every shot count." June moved in a crouch, keeping low, her rifle clutched to her chest. A bullet whined past her head so close she felt the air displacement, and she forced herself not to think about how close she'd just come to dying. There'd be time for fear later. Right now, she needed to fight. She reached the back window and carefully peered through a gap in the shutters. In the moonlight, she could see 3 men advancing on the house, using the barn and outbuildings as cover, firing as they moved. One of them was reloading, his attention focused on his weapon rather than the house. June took a breath, steadied the rifle against her shoulder the way Gage had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, and the rifle's report was deafening in the enclosed space, but she saw the man with the gun jerk backward and fall. Her first real shot at another human being, and she'd hit him. She should have felt something: horror, guilt, remorse. Instead, all she felt was a cold satisfaction and the immediate need to find her next target. "That's it, June!" Gage shouted from across the room. "Keep them pinned down!" The 2 remaining men at the back had found cover, but June could see them, could see the edges of their bodies behind the water trough and the corner of the barn. She fired twice more, not hitting but forcing them to keep their heads down, buying time. From the front of the house, Gage's rifle cracked repeatedly, each shot deliberate and controlled. June risked a glance in his direction and saw him moving between windows with fluid efficiency, never staying in one place long enough to make an easy target. This was what he'd been before: a Texas Ranger, a hunter of men, someone who'd survived through skill and speed and sheer determination. 3 years of relative peace hadn't dulled those instincts one bit. "June, reload!" Gage called. "And get ready to move. They're going to try to rush us." June's hands shook slightly as she ejected the spent cartridges and fed new ones into the rifle's magazine. She'd practiced this motion dozens of times over the past 5 days, but doing it with bullets flying and death waiting outside was entirely different from doing it in the afternoon sun. She finished reloading just as one of the men at the back broke from cover, running low and fast toward the house. June tracked him with her rifle, led him slightly the way Gage had taught her, and fired. The man stumbled but kept coming, and June fired again. This time he went down hard and stayed down. "Good shot!" Gage's voice held approval despite the circumstances. "But we've got a problem. They're trying to flank us on the east side. I need you to—" His words were cut off by a new sound, the sharp crack of breaking wood from the direction of the root cellar. June's blood turned to ice. They'd talked about this possibility, about attackers trying to get into the house through the cellar entrance rather than coming through the doors or windows. "Gage, the cellar!" "I hear it. Stay where you are. Cover the back." Gage was already moving, grabbing the shotgun he'd positioned specifically for close quarters fighting, heading toward the narrow door that led down to the root cellar. June turned back to her window, her rifle up and ready, trying to watch both her assigned position and Gage simultaneously. The man at the back who'd been pinned behind the water trough was moving again, using his dead companion's body as cover, advancing on the house. June fired and missed, the bullet kicking up dirt 2 feet to his left. She fired again and saw him flinch, saw blood bloom on his arm, but he kept coming. From below the house, June heard the boom of Gage's shotgun, then a scream, then the shotgun again. Whoever had been trying to come up through the cellar wouldn't be trying anything again. But now the man outside was at the back wall of the house, directly below June's window where she couldn't get an angle on him. She heard him moving, heard the sound of something heavy being dragged, a ladder maybe, or a barrel to stand on. He was going to try to come through the window. June backed away from the shutters, her rifle aimed at chest height, waiting. Her hands were steady now, her mind crystal clear in a way it hadn't been since before the beating in Sweetwater Creek. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. The shutters exploded inward, blown apart by a shotgun blast from outside, and the man came through the opening head first, his gun raised. June fired without hesitation, the rifle bucking in her hands. The man's head snapped back and he fell backward out the window, dead before he hit the ground. "June!" Gage was back in the main room, his shotgun discarded in favor of his rifle again. "You all right?" "I'm fine. One came through the window. He's dead." "Good. We're down to 3, maybe 4 of them left, but they're going to try something desperate now. Stay alert." For several minutes, an eerie quiet descended over the ranch. The shooting had stopped, leaving only the sound of their own breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. June kept her rifle trained on the back, watching for movement, while Gage covered the front. "What are they doing?" June asked quietly. "Regrouping, deciding whether to cut their losses and run, or—" Gage stopped suddenly, his entire body going rigid. "Oh, hell! June, get away from the walls, now!" June moved on instinct, not questioning, scrambling toward the center of the room where Gage was already positioning himself. A second later, she understood why. Smoke began seeping through the gaps in the walls, acrid and thick, followed by the first orange flickers of flame. "They're burning us out," Gage said grimly. "Must have doused the walls with lamp oil and set it. We've got maybe 5 minutes before this whole place goes up." June's mind flashed to Emma Walker, to the story Gage had told her about his first family burning alive in this very house. History was trying to repeat itself, and she could see the realization hitting Gage like a physical blow. "No," he breathed. "Not again. Not you." "We're not dying here," June said fiercely, grabbing his arm. "You hear me, Gage? We're not dying. What's the plan?" The touch and the words seemed to snap Gage back to himself. His jaw tightened and his eyes cleared, the momentary paralysis falling away. "The front door. We go out shooting, make for the barn. Horses are saddled. I did it earlier just in case. We mount up and ride hard for the North Trail. They'll be waiting for us. They'll shoot us the moment we step outside. Probably, but we die fighting or we die burning, and I know which one I prefer." Gage moved to the door, pressed his back against the wall beside it. "You ready?" June took a position on the other side of the door, her rifle held ready, and looked across at this man who'd saved her life, who'd given her a home, who'd become something she hadn't dared to name even in her own mind. "I'm with you, whatever happens." "Whatever happens," Gage echoed. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. He kicked the door open and they burst through together, rifles blazing. June saw muzzle flashes from behind the water trough, from the corner of the barn, from somewhere near the chicken coop. She fired at the flashes, not aiming carefully now, just trying to put enough lead in the air to make the attackers duck and give them a chance to reach cover. Something tugged at her skirt, a bullet passing through the fabric, and another whined past her ear. Beside her, Gage grunted in pain and stumbled, and June saw blood on his left arm, but he kept moving, kept firing, shepherding her toward the barn with his body positioned between her and the heaviest fire. They made it to the barn doorway and ducked inside, both breathing hard, and June got her first good look at Gage's wound. The bullet had carved a furrow along his upper arm, deep enough to bleed freely but not life-threatening. "I'm fine," he said before she could ask. "Just a graze. Get on Rosie, she's the steadiest under fire. I'll take Dust." June moved to the mare's stall, her hands shaking now that they had a moment's reprieve. Rosie nickered nervously, smelling the smoke and blood, but she stood steady as June mounted. Across the barn, Gage was already on Dust, his rifle in one hand, his injured arm clamped against his side. "When we go out, ride low and fast. Don't stop for anything. I'll be right behind you." Gage met her eyes. "If something happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you." "June." "Nothing is going to happen to you," June repeated fiercely. "We're both getting out of this. We're both surviving. That's not negotiable." Despite everything, Gage smiled. "Yes, ma'am." More shots peppered the barn, and June heard men shouting outside, organizing, preparing for another assault. The house behind them was fully engulfed now, flames shooting up into the night sky, smoke billowing in black clouds. Everything Gage had built, destroyed again. But this time was different. This time the people inside weren't trapped and helpless. This time they were armed and angry and absolutely refusing to die. "Now!" Gage shouted, spurring Dust forward. They burst from the barn at a gallop, June leaning low over Rosie's neck, the mare's powerful muscles surging beneath her. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, but they were moving too fast to make easy targets, and the shooters were backlit by the burning house, making them easier to see. Gage's rifle cracked twice, and June saw a man spin and fall. She fired one-handed, the rifle awkward from horseback, but she didn't care about accuracy now. She just wanted to make the attackers think twice about standing up to shoot. They cleared the main yard and hit the trail heading north, the path Gage had shown her during their preparations. Behind them, the shooting was fading, but June didn't slow down. She kept Rosie at a full gallop, trusting the mare to navigate the moonlit trail, trusting Gage to follow. They'd ridden maybe a quarter mile when June heard hoofbeats behind them. Not Gage's horse, but multiple riders giving chase. She risked a glance back and saw 3 men on horseback, outlined against the glow of the burning ranch, pushing their mounts hard. "They're following!" June shouted. "I know! Keep going!" Gage had pulled alongside her, and even in the moonlight, June could see blood staining his entire left sleeve now. The wound was worse than he'd admitted, or the hard riding was making it worse. The trail narrowed as it climbed into the hills, forcing them to single file. June took the lead, trusting Rosie to find the safest path, while Gage dropped back to guard their rear. She heard him fire twice more, heard one of the pursuing horses scream and stumble, heard men cursing. The trail twisted and turned, following the contours of the landscape, and June had to focus all her attention on not getting thrown or running into low-hanging branches. Behind her, she could hear Gage's labored breathing, could sense him struggling to stay mounted. "There!" Gage called out. "The rock's on the right! Pull in there!" June saw what he meant. A jumble of large boulders that formed a natural fortress of sorts, with enough space behind them for the horses but defensible from a few positions. She guided Rosie into the shelter and dismounted quickly, her rifle already coming up. Gage pulled in beside her and half fell from his horse, catching himself against Dust's saddle. Up close, June could see how much blood he'd lost, could see the pallor of his skin and the way his hands shook. "I'm fine," he said automatically. "You're not fine. Let me look at it." "No time. There—" Gage stopped, cocking his head to listen. The sound of pursuing hoofbeats had stopped. June strained her ears but heard nothing except the wind in the scrub brush and the heavy breathing of their horses. "Where are they?" she whispered. "Out there. Somewhere. Probably splitting up, trying to flank us or waiting for daylight." Gage slid down the boulder until he was sitting, his rifle across his lap. "We're pinned here. Can't move without them hearing us, and I can't ride much further anyway." June's mind raced through their options. They were 3 or 4 miles from the ranch, maybe 2 miles from the main road where they might find help. Dawn was still hours away. Gage was injured and losing blood. They had limited ammunition. June checked her pockets and found she had maybe 20 rounds left for the rifle. Gage probably had more, but not much. "All right," June said, making a decision. "You stay here. I'll go for help. Red Rock is—" "No." Gage's voice was firm despite his obvious pain. "You don't know the way well enough, and if they catch you alone, you're dead. We stay together. You need a doctor. That arm will keep for a few more hours. I've had worse." Gage pulled a bandana from his pocket and tied it awkwardly around his wound, using his teeth to tighten the knot. "Come first light, we'll reassess, but right now we dig in and wait." June wanted to argue, wanted to do something other than just sit here while Gage bled, but she recognized the logic of his words. Moving now in the dark with armed men hunting them would be suicidal. So she positioned herself at the edge of their rocky shelter, her rifle aimed out at the darkness, and settled in to wait. Beside her, she could hear Gage's breathing growing more labored, could smell the copper tang of blood on the night air. "Tell me something," Gage said after a long silence. "Something good. Something from before everything went to hell." June thought for a moment, reaching back through her memories for something untainted by loss and pain. "When I was 7, she said quietly, my father took me to San Antonio for the first time. Just the 2 of us. Mama was sick, so it was this special trip. We stayed in a real hotel, ate in a restaurant, walked around the city looking at everything, and there was this street musician playing a fiddle. He was playing the most beautiful music I'd ever heard, and my father gave me a penny to put in his hat." "What did he play?" Gage asked, his voice drowsy. "Shenandoah." "I didn't know the name then, but I learned it later. And for years after, whenever I heard that song, I'd think of that day, of my father's hand in mine, of the sun on my face, of being happy and safe and loved. June's voice caught slightly. That's what I hold on to when things get dark. That memory, that feeling. That's good, Gage murmured. That's real good, June. He fell silent after that, and June listened to his breathing, counting the intervals, making sure they stayed steady. She wanted to check on him more thoroughly, wanted to do something about the blood he was losing, but she didn't dare take her attention off the darkness surrounding them. Hours crawled past. June's eyes burned with the effort of staring into the shadows, her ears straining for any sound that might indicate approaching danger. The temperature dropped as the night progressed, and she wished she'd grabbed a coat before they fled. Wished she could do something to keep Gage warm. Finally, imperceptibly at first, the sky began to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming, bringing with it both hope and danger. They'd be able to see their attackers, but their attackers would be able to see them too. As the gray light strengthened, June saw movement about 50 yards out. A man rising from behind a rock, stretching stiff muscles, clearly thinking the people he was hunting were either long gone or dead. June raised her rifle carefully, sighted on the man's center mass, and hesitated. She'd killed men during the attack on the house, at least 2, probably 3, but those had been in the heat of battle, split-second decisions made in chaos and fear. This was different. This was deliberate, calculated. This was cold-blooded killing, and something in June rebelled against it. "Do it," Gage said quietly from behind her. "He won't hesitate to kill you if the positions were reversed." June knew he was right. These men had burned Gage's house, had tried to murder them both, would try again given the chance. This wasn't murder. This was survival. She squeezed the trigger. The man dropped, and immediately 2 other locations erupted with gunfire. The other pursuers, revealing their positions as they shot at where they'd seen June's muzzle flash. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them, spraying them with stone chips. June ducked back into cover and looked at Gage. His face was gray now, his lips bloodless, but his eyes were still sharp. 2 more, he said. Maybe 3, can't quite tell. We can't stay here. You need medical attention. I need to not get shot again more than I need medical attention. Give me your rifle. You reload mine. Gage took her rifle and positioned himself at a different angle, his movements slow but deliberate. June quickly reloaded his rifle, her hands moving through the familiar motions with practiced efficiency. As she worked, she heard Gage fire twice, then grunt with satisfaction. 1 down. Clipped another. Saw him fall back. How many rounds do we have left? Not enough for a prolonged fight. We need to end this soon. Gage handed back June's rifle and took his own. There's a gully about 30 yards to our left. Runs north toward the main road. If we can make it there, we can use it for cover and keep moving, but we'll be exposed for maybe 10 seconds getting to it. 10 seconds is a long time to be a target. You have a better idea? June didn't. She checked her rifle one more time, made sure her pistol was secure in her waistband, and nodded. I'm ready when you are. We go on 3. You run, I'll cover you. When you're safe, you cover me. Understood? Understood. Gage took a deep breath, steadying himself. 1, 2, 3. June burst from cover and ran, her legs pumping, her lungs burning, every second expecting to feel a bullet tear into her back. Gunfire erupted behind her, Gage laying down covering fire, and she heard bullets whining past her head, but she didn't stop, didn't slow down, just ran until she reached the gully and threw herself into it. She rolled, came up with her rifle ready, and saw Gage stumbling toward her, his face a mask of pain and determination. Behind him, she saw a man rise from cover, taking careful aim at Gage's back. June fired without conscious thought, pure instinct driving her actions. The man jerked and fell, and Gage made it to the gully, collapsing beside her with a gasp. Good shot, he managed. Saved my life. We're even now, June replied, helping him sit up. His wound had opened up again during the run, blood flowing freely. Come on, we need to keep moving. They moved down the gully, using it as cover, stopping every few yards so Gage could rest. June kept her rifle ready, watching their back trail for pursuit, but after several minutes of seeing and hearing nothing, she began to hope that maybe they'd gotten away. They'd traveled perhaps half a mile when June heard the most beautiful sound she'd ever encountered, the jingle of harness and the rumble of wagon wheels on the main road, just ahead and above them. "Hello!" June shouted, climbing up out of the gully. "Help! We need help!" The wagon, a freight wagon heading east, pulled to a stop, and a grizzled teamster peered down at her with wide eyes. "Miss, you all right? You're covered in blood and—" "It's not my blood. My friend is injured. We were attacked. Please, we need to get to Red Rock, to a doctor." The teamster didn't ask questions. He climbed down and helped June get Gage up and into the wagon bed, then whipped his team into the fastest pace they could manage. June cradled Gage's head in her lap, pressing her hand against his wound to slow the bleeding, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. "Stay with me," she said. "You don't get to die after everything we've been through. You hear me, Gage Walker? You stay with me." Gage's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with obvious effort. "Not dying," he mumbled. "Too stubborn." "That's right, you're too stubborn. We're both too stubborn." June smoothed the hair back from his forehead with her free hand. "Just hold on a little longer." Red Rock appeared on the horizon, its buildings growing larger as the wagon raced toward them. The teamster was shouting now, alerting the town to their approach, and June saw people emerging from buildings, saw a man in a marshal's badge running toward them. The wagon pulled up in front of a building with a sign reading, "Dr. Morrison, Physician and Surgeon," and suddenly there were hands helping her down, helping to carry Gage inside. A middle-aged man with wire-rimmed spectacles took one look at Gage and started barking orders. "Get him on the table. You boil water. You fetch my surgical kit. Miss, I need you to step outside while I work." "No," June said flatly. "I'm staying." The doctor looked ready to argue, but something in June's expression made him reconsider. "Fine, but stay out of my way." For the next hour, June stood against the wall and watched Dr. Morrison work to save Gage's life. He cleaned the wound, probed for bullet fragments, stitched torn flesh back together with small, precise movements. Through it all, Gage drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious, once calling out for Emma before his eyes opened and found June, and he remembered, the grief and guilt flashing across his face before the laudanum the doctor had given him pulled him back under. Finally, the doctor straightened, wiping his hands on a blood-stained cloth. "He'll live. Lost a lot of blood, and there's always a risk of infection, but he's strong and healthy otherwise. He should make a full recovery with rest and proper care." June felt her knees buckle with relief, and she caught herself against the wall. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. That's only half your problem solved." The doctor gestured toward the door where the marshal now stood. "The marshal's going to want to know what happened. And from the looks of both of you, it's one hell of a story." June looked at the marshal, a lean man in his 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense expression, and straightened her spine. She'd survived a beating. She'd survived an attack. She'd killed men in defense of her life and Gage's. Whatever came next, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything else. Standing up, fighting back, refusing to yield. "It is one hell of a story, Marshal," she said. "And you're going to want to hear every word of it. Because the man behind this, Calvin Briggs, he's not going to stop. Not unless someone stops him first." The marshal's eyes sharpened with interest. "Calvin Briggs. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Come with me, miss. Let's talk about what happened, and then let's talk about what we're going to do about it." June sat across from Marshal Tom Hendricks in his small office, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, and told him everything. She started with Sweetwater Creek, with Blake Harker's fists and the dust in her mouth, and the good people who'd watched her nearly die. She told him about Gage pulling her from that street, about the ranch, about the visit from Dutch and the other men. She described the attack in detail, the fire, the shooting, the desperate flight through the darkness. And she told him about Calvin Briggs, about what he'd done to Gage's family 3 years ago, about why a man like that couldn't be allowed to keep hurting people. The marshal listened without interruption, his weathered face impassive, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When June finally finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and she couldn't read his expression well enough to know whether he believed her or thought she was hysterical or simply didn't care. "Calvin Briggs," he finally said, the name heavy in his mouth. "Been looking for that son of a bitch for years. Rangers want him. Federal marshals want him. Hell, every lawman from here to New Mexico wants him. But he's like smoke. The minute you think you've got him pinned down, he slips away." "Then help us catch him," June said. "He sent men to kill us. They failed, but he'll try again. And next time maybe we won't be lucky enough to survive." "What makes you think I can do anything the Rangers couldn't?" "Because you're here and they're not. Because Gage knows Calvin better than anyone, spent years hunting him, knows how he thinks, knows his patterns. And because—" June leaned forward, holding the marshal's gaze. "Because if you don't help us, Gage is going to go after Calvin himself the moment he's healed enough to ride. And he'll either get himself killed or he'll kill Calvin outside the law. And either way, justice won't be served." Marshal Hendricks studied her for a long moment, and June saw something like respect flicker in his eyes. "You love him, Gage Walker." It wasn't a question, but June answered anyway. "Yes, I do. I didn't mean to, didn't plan on it, but yes. And I won't watch him throw his life away on revenge when there's a better way." "The better way being?" "We find Calvin. We bring him in alive. We make him stand trial for everything he's done, for Emma Walker and her children, for all the other people he's killed and hurt. We make him pay under the law instead of outside it." The marshal leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "That's a nice thought, miss. But men like Calvin Briggs don't go quietly. They don't surrender. They go down fighting, taking as many people with them as they can." "Then we make sure we're ready for the fight," June said firmly, "but we try it the right way first. We owe that to Gage. We owe it to everyone Calvin's hurt." Marshal Hendricks was quiet again, clearly weighing his options. Finally he nodded. "All right, I'll wire the Rangers, let them know Calvin's active in this area. I'll deputize some men, form a posse. But I need something from you first." "What?" "I need you to convince Gage Walker to help us. Not to go off half-cocked on his own, but to work with us, use that knowledge he has to help us find Calvin and bring him in." The marshal's expression was grave. "Can you do that?" June thought about Gage, about the pain and rage and guilt that had been eating at him for 3 years. She thought about how he'd looked when Dutch mentioned his family, about the way his hands had shaken after telling June his story. Convincing him to work within the law instead of seeking personal vengeance was going to be like trying to redirect a river, possible maybe, but difficult and dangerous. "I'll try," she said. "That's all I can promise." "That'll have to be enough. Now go on back to the doctors. Your man's going to wake up soon and he'll want to see you." June stood, her body aching from the night's exertions, and made her way back to Dr. Morrison's surgery. She found Gage awake, propped up on pillows, his left arm heavily bandaged and held in a sling. His face was still pale, but his eyes were clear and focused when they found her in the doorway. "There you are," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thought maybe I'd dreamed you. Thought maybe you were—" "I'm fine. Not a scratch on me." June crossed to his bedside and took his good hand in both of hers. "You scared me, Gage Walker. When you were bleeding like that, when you passed out in the wagon, I thought, I know. I'm sorry." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Doctor says I'll be fine. Couple weeks of rest and I'll be good as new." "A couple weeks if you actually rest, which, knowing you, is unlikely." Despite everything, Gage smiled. "You know me too well already. I know you well enough to know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking about Calvin Briggs, about going after him as soon as you can sit a horse." June held his gaze. "Don't." "June, let me finish. I talked to Marshal Hendricks. He's willing to help us, to form a posse, to go after Calvin the right way. But he needs your help. He needs your knowledge of how Calvin operates, where he might be hiding, how to find him." "I work alone," Gage said automatically. "No, you don't, not anymore. You work with me, with the marshal, with people who want the same thing you want, to stop Calvin before he hurts anyone else." June moved closer, her voice dropping. "Emma wouldn't want you to throw your life away on revenge. Your children wouldn't want that. They'd want you to live, to find some kind of peace, to be more than just the man who hunts the man who killed them." Gage's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You don't know what it's like. The anger. The need to make him pay with my own hands. You're right. I don't know exactly what that's like. But I know what it's like to be beaten down and left for nothing. I know what it's like to want to hurt the people who hurt you. June's voice was fierce now. But I also know that living well, surviving and thriving despite what they did, that's the real revenge. That's how we win. Not by becoming like them, but by refusing to let them destroy us. Gage was quiet for a long time, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of June's hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. When did you get so wise? When a stubborn cowboy pulled me out of the dirt and showed me I was worth saving. June smiled through her own tears. Now I'm returning the favor. Let me help you, Gage. Let us all help you, please. Another long silence. Then almost imperceptibly, Gage nodded. All right. I'll work with the marshal. But June, if Calvin gets away again, if the law fails again, then we'll deal with that when and if it happens. But let's try it this way first. For Emma, for Samuel and Mary, for us. For us, Gage echoed, and something in his expression shifted. A burden lifting, if only slightly. I like the sound of that. Over the next 2 weeks, while Gage healed and regained his strength, Marshal Hendricks worked tirelessly to build his case and his posse. He wired the Texas Rangers, who sent 2 experienced men to assist. He deputized 6 locals who knew the territory and could shoot straight. And he spent hours with Gage, who was still bedridden but could provide invaluable intelligence about Calvin's operations, his known associates, his likely hiding places. June stayed at Gage's side through all of it, sleeping in a chair beside his bed, bringing him meals, changing his bandages, and slowly, carefully, helping him come to terms with what they were about to attempt. She could see the war being fought inside him, the desire for personal vengeance battling against his growing acceptance that justice, real justice, might actually be possible if they did this right. Dr. Morrison's wife, a kind woman named Margaret who reminded June of the mother she'd lost, offered June a room in their home and insisted she eat proper meals and get proper rest. Can't take care of anyone else if you don't take care of yourself first, Margaret said firmly, and June found she couldn't argue with that logic. In the evenings, after the marshal had left and Dr. Morrison had completed his rounds, June and Gage would talk. Not about Calvin or the attack or what was coming, but about smaller things, about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. June told Gage about her father's farm, about learning to read from her mother's worn Bible, about the loneliness of her marriage to Thomas. Gage told her about growing up in Missouri, about joining the Rangers because he believed in making the world safer, about how Emma had laughed, really laughed, with her whole body, when something struck her as funny. I haven't talked about her like this in years, Gage admitted one evening. Used to hurt too much. But telling you these stories, remembering the good times instead of just the end, it helps. Makes her feel less like a ghost and more like a person I was lucky enough to know. She was lucky to have you too, June said. And wherever she is now, I think she's glad you found someone to keep living for. Is that what you are? Someone to keep living for? June considered the question seriously. I think we're each other's reason. You gave me back my life when Blake Harker tried to take it. And maybe I'm giving you back yours, or at least helping you find a new version of it. We're not replacing what we lost. We're building something different, something that's ours. Gage reached out with his good hand and cupped June's face gently. I love you, June Talbot. I didn't think I'd ever say those words again, didn't think I had any love left in me after losing Emma and the kids. But you brought something back to life in me that I thought was dead forever. June's breath caught in her throat. She'd known, of course, had felt it growing between them over the weeks and months. But hearing Gage say it out loud, hearing the raw honesty in his voice, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I love you too, she said, and felt the truth of it resonate through her entire being. I love you, Gage Walker, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure we both survive what's coming so we can figure out what that love looks like in the daylight, when we're not just surviving but actually living. They kissed then, careful of Gage's injuries, and it was soft and sweet and tasted like hope. When they pulled apart, Both were crying. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finding each other, of not being alone anymore, of having something worth fighting for, beyond mere survival. On the 15th day after the attack, Dr. Morrison declared Gage fit enough to travel, though he cautioned against anything too strenuous. "No hard riding, no gunfights, no heroics," the doctor said sternly. "That arm's healing well, but you tear those stitches and you'll be right back in my surgery, possibly minus the arm entirely if infection sets in." "I'll be careful, Doc," Gage promised, though June could see the restlessness in his eyes, the need to be doing something instead of just sitting around healing. Marshal Hendricks arrived that afternoon with news. Rangers tracked 3 of Calvin's men to a canyon about 40 miles northwest of here. Wounded men, moving slow, heading for what the Rangers think is Calvin's main camp. "We follow them. We find Calvin." "How many men does he have at the camp?" Gage asked, already mentally preparing for the fight. "Rangers estimate between 12 and 20. Well armed, well positioned. It's not going to be easy." "Nothing about Calvin has ever been easy." Gage stood carefully, testing his balance. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light. That gives you tonight to rest up, and gives me time to make sure the posse's ready." The marshal looked between Gage and June. "Miss Talbot, I'll arrange for you to stay here in town where it's safe. This is going to be dangerous, and—" "I'm coming with you," June interrupted. "Absolutely not," Gage and the marshal said simultaneously. June crossed her arms and fixed them both with a look that would have cowed a lesser man. "I can shoot. I can ride. I've already killed 3 of Calvin's men defending Gage and myself. I'm not staying behind like some delicate flower while you men ride off to risk your lives." "June, this is different from defending the ranch," Gage said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is going to be an all-out assault on a fortified position. People are going to die. I won't risk losing you. And I won't sit here wondering if you're alive or dead, wondering if I could have helped, wondering if my absence made the difference between success and failure." June moved closer to Gage, her voice dropping. "You said we're each other's reason for living. That means we face the dangerous things together, not separately. You don't get to protect me by leaving me behind. That's not how this works." Gage looked at the marshal helplessly. "A little support here would be appreciated." "Don't look at me. My wife would skin me alive if I tried to tell her she couldn't do something because it was too dangerous." Marshal Hendricks shrugged. "Besides, Miss Talbot's right. She's proven she can handle herself in a fight, and we need every gun we can get if we're going up against 20 of Calvin's men." "This is insane," Gage muttered, but June could see him weakening. "This is partnership," June corrected. "This is what it means to stand with someone. You said I'd stand with you, Gage. Let me." Gage closed his eyes, clearly fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, June saw resignation mixed with pride. "Fine, but you stay close to me. You follow my orders without question. And if I tell you to run, you run. Agreed?" "Agreed," June lied, knowing full well that if it came down to it, she'd do whatever was necessary to keep Gage alive. Orders be damned. They set out at dawn the next morning, a force of 12 in total. Marshal Hendricks led, with the 2 Rangers flanking him. Gage rode beside June, his rifle across his saddle, his injured arm still in a sling, but otherwise looking stronger than he had in days. The 6 deputized locals brought up the rear, good men all, according to the marshal, men who understood the stakes and were willing to risk their lives to bring Calvin Briggs to justice. They rode through country June had never seen before, following trails that wound through arroyos and over mesas, the landscape growing progressively more rugged and remote. This was outlaw country, the marshal explained, places where a man could disappear if he knew the land, where posses rarely ventured because the terrain was too dangerous and the likelihood of ambush too high. "Calvin knows we're coming," Gage said as they rode. "Dutch would have reported back after the attack failed. Calvin knows we survived, knows we're likely coming for him. He'll be ready." "Then we'll be readier," Marshal Hendricks replied grimly. "Rangers are scouting ahead. They'll give us advanced warning if there are any surprises waiting." They made camp that night in a protected hollow, with guards posted and fires kept small. June sat with Gage away from the others, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, and tried not to think about what tomorrow might bring. Scared? Gage asked softly. Terrified, June admitted. But also, I don't know. Ready, I guess. Ready to finish this, one way or another. You don't have to go through with this. Even now you could turn back, head to Red Rock, wait for us there. I could, June agreed, but I won't. We're in this together, Gage, all the way to the end. Gage pulled her close with his good arm, and they sat like that until the stars filled the sky and the night grew cold, drawing strength from each other's presence, preparing themselves mentally for what the next day would bring. They reached the canyon just before noon. The rangers had done their work well. They'd identified the camp's location, counted the guards, mapped the approaches. Calvin had chosen his position carefully, June saw. The camp was in a box canyon with steep walls and only one entrance, easily defensible but also potentially a trap if they could block that entrance. Marshal Hendricks gathered the posse and laid out the plan. Half of us will approach from the front, make noise, draw their attention. The other half, including you, Gage, since you know Calvin by sight, will circle around and come in from above. There's a trail the rangers found that leads to the canyon rim. It's dangerous, but it gives us the high ground. And if Calvin tries to run, one of the deputies asked, then we make sure there's nowhere for him to run to. This ends today, one way or another. They split into two groups. June insisted on going with Gage's group, and after a brief argument that she won through sheer stubbornness, he relented. They left their horses with the deputies who would approach from the front and began the difficult climb up to the canyon rim. The trail was treacherous, little more than a goat path in places, with loose stones and steep drops that made June's heart pound. Gage moved carefully, his injured arm hampering his balance, and June stayed close, ready to catch him if he stumbled. Behind them, the two rangers and one of the deputies climbed in silence, their rifles slung across their backs, their eyes scanning for threats. It took them an hour to reach the rim, and by the time they did, June's legs were trembling with exertion, and her hands were scraped raw from grabbing at rocks for support. But they'd made it. Below them, perhaps 30 feet down, they could see Calvin's camp, rough shelters built against the canyon walls, a cooking fire burning, men moving around with the casual confidence of people who believed themselves safe. Gage lay flat on the rim and studied the camp through a small telescope, his jaw tight. I count 16 men. No, wait, 17. And there, his voice went hard. There's Calvin. June moved beside him and looked where he was pointing. She saw a man standing near the largest shelter, tall and lean, with dark hair going gray at the temples and an air of command even from this distance. He didn't look particularly evil or threatening, just a man, ordinary and human. But June knew better than to judge by appearances. Evil rarely looked the part. Below them, at the canyon entrance, June heard the sound of horses and shouting. The marshal's group had arrived, making themselves known, drawing Calvin's attention to the front, while Gage and his team prepared to attack from above. Get ready, Gage whispered. When the marshal gives the signal, 3 shots close together, we start shooting. Aim for the men with guns. Try not to hit the horses. And June, he looked at her, his eyes full of worry and love. Stay safe. You too, June replied, checking her rifle one final time. The signal came moments later, 3 rapid shots echoing off the canyon walls. Chaos erupted below as Calvin's men scrambled for weapons and cover, unsure where the attack was coming from. Gage's group opened fire from above, their elevated position giving them a devastating advantage. June aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger, saw a man drop, moved to the next target. The fight was brutal and fast. Calvin's men, caught between 2 forces and with nowhere to run, fought desperately. Some tried to surrender and were taken into custody by the marshal's group. Others fought to the death, preferring that to the hangman's noose they knew awaited them. Through it all, June kept shooting, kept moving, kept Gage in her peripheral vision. She saw him take down 3 men with 3 shots, saw the cold efficiency with which he fought, saw the years of ranger training and personal vendetta converging in this moment. And then she saw Calvin. He'd been trying to reach his horse, trying to escape in the confusion, and he was almost there when Gage shouted his name. "Calvin! Briggs!" The man turned, and even from 30 feet above, June could see his eyes widen with recognition. Calvin went for his gun, but Gage was faster. His shot hit Calvin in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Gage was on his feet immediately, climbing down the canyon wall with reckless speed despite his injured arm, and June followed without thinking, her heart in her throat. They reached the canyon floor just as Calvin was struggling to his feet, his gun lost somewhere in the dirt, blood streaming from his shoulder. Gage walked toward him slowly, deliberately, his rifle pointed at Calvin's chest. The other fighting had stopped. The last of Calvin's men either dead or surrendered, and everyone in the canyon watched as these two men, hunter and hunted for so many years, finally came face to face. "It's over, Calvin," Gage said, his voice eerily calm. "No more running, no more killing. It's over." Calvin laughed, the sound wet and pained. "Is it? You going to kill me, Walker? Going to avenge your pretty little family? Go ahead. Pull the trigger. Prove you're just like me." June saw Gage's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the war being fought across his face. This was the moment he'd been living for, the moment he'd dreamed about during 3 years of grief and rage. All he had to do was squeeze a little harder, and Calvin Briggs would be dead, his family avenged, justice served. But Gage's hand was shaking. His breath was coming in gasps. And June realized with sudden clarity that he couldn't do it, couldn't make that final choice, couldn't cross that line between justice and murder. She moved to his side and gently placed her hand over his on the rifle, lowering it slowly. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't give him that. Don't become what he is." "He killed them," Gage whispered, his voice breaking. "Emma, Samuel, Mary, he burned them alive." "I know, and he'll pay for that. He'll stand trial, he'll be convicted, he'll hang. But not like this. Not murdered in the dirt like he murdered them. They deserve better than that. You deserve better than that." Gage looked at her, tears streaming down his face, and June saw the moment he let go. Let go of the revenge, let go of the rage, let go of the burden he'd been carrying for 3 years. His rifle dropped to his side and he sagged against her, sobbing like a child. Marshal Hendricks moved in quickly, pulling Calvin to his feet and binding his hands. "Calvin Briggs, you're under arrest for murder, arson, robbery, and about 24 other charges. You'll stand trial in Austin, and God have mercy on your soul, because I sure as hell won't." Calvin stared at Gage as the marshal led him away, and there was something like respect in his eyes. "You were always the best of them, Walker. The only one who ever really came close to catching me. Guess you finally did." Gage didn't respond. He just held on to June and cried, purging years of pain and guilt and rage, while around them the marshal's men secured the prisoners and tended to the wounded. The battle was over. Calvin was captured. Justice would be served. But more importantly than any of that, Gage Walker had chosen life over death, healing over revenge, love over hate. And that, June knew, was the real victory. The trial took place 6 weeks later in Austin, with half of Texas seeming to turn out to watch Calvin Briggs finally face justice for his crimes. June and Gage attended every day, sitting in the front row, holding hands while witness after witness testified to Calvin's brutality, his crimes, his absolute disregard for human life. When Gage took the stand and told the story of his family's murder, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Calvin to hang, and as he was led from the courtroom, he caught Gage's eye one final time. "For what it's worth," Calvin said, "I'm sorry about your family. That was Dutch's idea, not mine. If I'd known—" He shrugged. "Well, it doesn't matter now, does it?" Gage just nodded, and June saw that he'd meant what he said in the canyon. He'd let it go. Not forgotten, he'd never forget Emma and his children. But he'd released the need for personal vengeance, had found a kind of peace in seeing justice actually work the way it was supposed to. They stayed in Austin for the hanging, both of them feeling like they needed to see it through to the very end. When Calvin dropped through the trap and the doctor pronounced him dead, Gage let out a long, shuddering breath and turned to June. "It's done," he said simply. "It's finally done." They left Austin the next morning, heading back toward Red Rock and the life they'd begun building together. The ranch was gone, burned to the ground by Calvin's men, but Gage had land elsewhere, a smaller piece of property he'd bought years ago as an investment and never developed. It was north of Red Rock, in pretty country with good water and better soil, and as they rode toward it, June felt something she hadn't felt in years: genuine excitement about the future. "We'll build a new house," Gage said as they traveled. "One that's ours, without any ghosts, without any painful memories. We'll start fresh." "I'd like that," June replied, "though I have to say I've gotten rather attached to sleeping indoors. Maybe we could hurry the building process along." Gage laughed, really laughed, with joy and lightness, and June realized it was the first time she'd heard that sound from him. "Tell you what, we'll stay at the hotel in Red Rock while we build. That way you'll have a real bed and 4 solid walls, and I'll have you close by while I'm working. Deal?" "Deal. Though I should warn you, I intend to help with the building. I'm not sitting around in town being decorative while you do all the work." "I wouldn't dream of trying to stop you. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, remember?" "Determined," June corrected with a smile. "The word is determined." They reached the property 3 days later, and June fell in love with it immediately. The land rolled gently, with a creek running through the southern section and a stand of old oak trees that would provide shade and beauty. There was already a small barn on the property, in better shape than the one that had burned, and the foundation for a house had been laid years ago, but never built on. "We can use this foundation," Gage said, examining it critically. "Save us some time and work. If we push hard and the weather cooperates, we could have walls up before winter." They spent the next 4 months living in Red Rock and building their house. True to her word, June worked alongside Gage every day, sawing boards, hammering nails, laying stones for the fireplace. Margaret Morrison taught her about plastering and finishing, while Gage handled the heavy timber work with help from some of the deputies who'd ridden with them against Calvin. As the house took shape, so did their relationship. They worked out the rhythms of living together, of compromise and collaboration, of building something that belonged to both of them equally. Gage taught June to read the land, to understand weather patterns and soil quality. June taught Gage to laugh again, to find joy in small moments, to accept that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. On a crisp November afternoon, with the first hints of winter in the air and the house finally complete, Gage and June stood on their new front porch and surveyed what they'd built together. The house wasn't fancy, just a simple structure of wood and stone, but it was solid and true and theirs. "What do you think?" Gage asked. "I think it's perfect," June replied honestly. "I think it's exactly what we both needed." Gage turned to her, his expression serious. "June Talbot, I've been meaning to ask you something. Probably should have asked weeks ago, but I wanted to wait until the house was done, until we had something solid to build a life around." June's heart began to race. "Ask me what?" "Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, stand with me, build a life with me in this house we've made together?" Gage pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "I know I come with baggage and ghosts and a past that's complicated. I know I'm not easy, but I love you more than I thought I'd ever love anyone again. And I want to spend whatever time I have left making you happy." June felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears, tears of absolute certainty. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I'll marry you, Gage Walker. I'll stand with you, build with you, love you for however long we both shall live." Gage slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, and it was everything a kiss should be, sweet and passionate and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the sheer improbability of finding each other, of surviving everything that had tried to break them, of standing here together on this porch they'd built with their own hands. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the church in Red Rock, with Marshall Hendricks giving June away and Dr. and Mrs. Morrison standing as witnesses. June wore a dress Margaret had helped her make, simple blue calico that made her eyes shine. Gage wore his best clothes and looked nervous and happy and more alive than June had ever seen him. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, when Gage kissed her in front of God and everyone, June felt a completeness she'd never known before. She wasn't just Mrs. Walker now. She was June Walker, partner and equal, a woman who'd been beaten down but had risen again, who'd found love in the aftermath of violence, who'd proven that broken things could indeed be made stronger in the mending. That night, in their new house with a fire crackling in the hearth and the Texas stars shining through the window, Gage held June close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" June asked, drowsy and content. "For saving me, for refusing to let me destroy myself with revenge, for showing me that there's life after loss, love after grief." He kissed the top of her head. "For standing with me." "Always," June promised. "I'll always stand with you." The years that followed were good ones, better than either of them had dared to hope for. They built a successful ranch together, raising horses and cattle, working side by side in all things. June discovered she had a gift for training horses, and word spread until people were bringing their animals from counties away for her to work with. Gage proved to be an excellent rancher, combining the discipline he'd learned as a ranger with a genuine care for the land and animals. In the spring of their third year together, June gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose, after Gage's first wife and in honor of new beginnings. 2 years later, a son arrived, Thomas Samuel, named for both their pasts but looking firmly toward the future. The children grew up strong and loved, never knowing hunger or fear or the casual cruelty June had endured as a child. Gage proved to be a wonderful father, patient and kind, determined to give his children the security and love that Emma, Samuel, and Mary had been denied. He told them stories about their older siblings, keeping their memory alive without letting grief overshadow joy. And sometimes, in the evenings, he'd pull out the photograph that now hung in the main room, Emma and the children, young and happy, and tell his new family about the people who'd come before. "They're part of our story," he'd explained to little Emma Rose when she asked about the people in the picture. "They loved and were loved, and that love doesn't just disappear when people die. It stays, becomes part of everything that comes after. You and your brother are here because of them, in a way. Their loss led me to your mother, and your mother led me back to life." June would watch these moments with tears in her eyes, grateful beyond measure that Gage had found a way to honor his past while fully embracing his present. The ghosts were still there, they'd always be there, but they were gentle ghosts now, reminders of love rather than sources of pain. Sometimes, when visitors came to the ranch, they'd ask how Gage and June met. The answer was always the same, simple and true. She was on the ground, I picked her up, and she never fell again. It wasn't the whole story, of course. It left out the violence and the fear, the burning house and the desperate flight, the final confrontation with Calvin Briggs, and the choice to seek justice instead of revenge. But it captured the essential truth of their relationship. Two broken people who'd found each other in the midst of darkness and chosen to build something bright. On their 10th anniversary, June and Gage stood on that same front porch where he'd proposed, watching their children play in the yard, and reflected on how far they'd come. "Do you ever regret it?" June asked. "Pulling me from that street in Sweetwater Creek? Your life would have been simpler without me." Gage looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Simpler, maybe, but also empty, meaningless, dead in all the ways that matter. You didn't complicate my life, June. You saved it. You saved, just like I saved yours." "We saved each other," June corrected, leaning into his embrace. "That's what people who love each other do." From inside the house, they heard Emma Rose calling that dinner was ready, her voice bright with childhood innocence. Thomas Samuel came running from the barn, covered in dust and hay, reporting excitedly about a new foal that had been born that morning. The evening stretched before them, full of family and warmth and the comfortable routines of a life well lived. June thought back to that day in Sweetwater Creek, to lying in the dust and believing she was going to die alone and forgotten. She thought about Blake Harker's boots and fists, about the faces of people who'd watched and done nothing, about how close she'd come to simply giving up. And then she thought about the sound of hoofbeats, about storm cloud eyes and gentle hands, about a voice saying, "You'll stand with me," and meaning it in ways neither of them had fully understood yet. That day had been the worst of her life and the beginning of her salvation. The beating had broken her, but the breaking had led her here, to this porch, this man, this family, this life. She'd been beaten down, but she'd risen. She'd been left for dead, but she'd survived. She'd lost everything, but she'd found something better. The sun was setting now, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. June watched it, Gage's arm around her waist, their children's laughter floating from the house, and felt a profound sense of peace. She'd faced the darkness and come through it. She'd stood when the world tried to keep her down. She'd loved when it seemed impossible to love again. She was June Walker, survivor, fighter, wife, mother, woman who'd been beaten but never broken. And every breath she took, every moment of joy she experienced, was a victory over every person who'd ever tried to make her feel like less than she was. Blake Harker had tried to destroy her in that Sweetwater Creek street. Calvin Briggs had tried to finish the job. Both had failed. And June knew, with absolute certainty, that she would never fall again. She would stand, with Gage beside her, with her children around her, with her head high and her spine straight, for all the days of her life. The woman who'd been beaten in the dust was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, more complete. Someone who knew her own worth and refused to let anyone diminish it. Someone who'd learned that true strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up, about choosing to keep going, about refusing to let the cruelty of others define your story. June Talbot had fallen, but June Walker would stand forever. And that, she thought as Gage kissed her temple and Emma Rose called them in for dinner, was the best revenge of all.